All right, good morning. I was just checking to see if there was a clock on the back wall, and there is, in fact. So I think we just sort of have to have one of those, don't we? I remember when I was in Georgia, I preached for the Piedmont Road Church in Atlanta, or just on the north side of Atlanta, for 11 years, and noticed that clock up there, and they sort of expected me to follow that clock, but I would never stand, or they had it in the pulpit rather, and I would never stand in the pulpit, and so I couldn't see it. And so then they put that big clock on the back wall. And then when I moved to Virginia, where I was at for about 5 years before moving to Freed-Hardeman a year and a half ago, they had the big clock on the back wall. And my father-in-law, who's a member of that congregation and served as an elder once upon a time, I told him, I said, I don't really like that clock on the back wall. And so the next thing I know, the clock's removed. Now, he didn't get in trouble for removing the clock, but he apparently told somebody. And so that clock was gone. But I kind of like the fact that we have that clock there, because I'm going to approach this in this fashion today. I have 3 sessions or 3 lectures or topics, however you want to identify them. It doesn't matter to me. But I have 3 things that I want to discuss. And I don't know how much time we'll spend on each one. Okay? I think that's kind of up to you. So we may go a little long in one area, and that's great. We'll go a little shorter in the others. And I'm going to do my very best to keep us on task as far as finishing by noon. I know this is a big football day, okay? If you're a Big 12 fan, I'm sorry. I think games are at 11 o'clock, but you'll be home, you'll have lunch, and you'll definitely catch the second half. Or if you're a big SEC fan like I am, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Big Ten, ACC, again, if you want to watch those games, those are in the evening. So still a lot of football for you to watch. You're not going to miss all of that. So, but I will do my part to try to get us out of here at 12 o'clock. Now, if we go beyond 12 o'clock, you know whose fault that is? It's not mine. If I wrap things up at 12, but you keep going, then that's going to be your fault, which is fine as well. But if in between those sessions, we're going to take a little break. So it wouldn't be fun for anybody to have to sit for 3 hours in a church pew, even though these look perfectly comfortable. I'm not going to make you do that, okay? So let's start with this. And I've got some new technology here that's your technology, but it looks really cool. So I'm going to play around with it, and hopefully everything works. But I wanted to start with this. Anybody recognize what this is? I mean, I think most of you do, but we got a few of you, you guys. Yeah, I'm sorry, I embarrassed you. These things are making a comeback. Record players, right? They're making a comeback. Well, there was this lady who was looking all over town for a specific record. And she was calling all of the record shops looking for the record, and she would ask the question, do you have this particular record? And the record was Sweet Lips and Lovin' Arms. Now, you know the genre of that. It's got to be country music, right? And so she's calling everybody looking for Sweet Lips and Lovin' Arms. Record shop owner, do you have Sweet Lips and Lovin' Arms? Nope, don't have that record. And she was just calling all over the place looking for the record, and nobody would have it. And she accidentally calls Joe's Record Shop instead of Joe's Record Shop instead of Joe's Record Shop. And she asked the question because the guy on the phone said, this is Joe, and she just said, well, do you have Sweet Lips and Lovin' Arms? He said, no, but I've got a wife and 8 children. She said, is that a record? I don't know, ma'am, but it's well above the average. And so what I would say is, if you're here on a Saturday, big championship day, Christmas buying season, all of that kind of stuff, you've got to be well above the average. And so thank you for coming out for this. And I also want to say this. This is not one of those topics that just everybody gets super excited about coming and learning about, talking about, engaging about, because I guess for a variety of reasons. It's uncomfortable for some folks. It is seen in the mind of some as not being a real thing. And I realize on a Saturday that you're here perhaps for a variety of reasons. Maybe you're one of these people that says, if the church doors are open, I'm going to be there. It doesn't matter what's going on, but I'm going to show up. I don't know if that's you, but if it is, you may be thinking, I don't really go along with all of this mental health stuff. And I say, okay, hopefully you'll just hear us out. You'll just listen. Because there are a lot of folks that are in this room right now that really do identify the value and the importance of it and the reality of it. And what I can tell you from what we know from the research is that there are more people that are dealing with matters pertaining to mental wellness than folks struggling with cardiac-related issues, diabetes, cancer combined. And yet, mental illness is more easily treated than these. Not that it's easy to treat in every case, but it is more easily treated in general. Okay, so it is a real thing. And I'm just grateful that you're here to listen. And so what I would say is, as we go through this process today, we're going to talk about anxiety, we're going to talk about depression, then we're going to talk about grief. But as we're going through and talking about these things, just remember that everybody here is in a different place when it comes to these matters. And for some of us, this is very raw. It's very real. It's hitting us right in the middle of our heart. And especially during this time of year, this season, it seems that people often struggle more intensely. And so let's be willing to listen. Let's be empathic. Let's be like Jesus. What did Jesus teach us? He taught us, Matthew chapter 18, to, in essence, take our shoes off, put somebody else's shoes on, and then walk a mile in them, or walk 20. And try to experience what it's like to be them, okay? So there may be somebody here right now, I don't know, but there could be somebody here right now that's in the throes of depression. And you have no idea what that's like. Try to listen. Or anxiety, or something else. Experience significant loss. And maybe you don't really understand what that's like. Maybe you can't really appreciate some of the emotions that others are experiencing who have gone through those kinds of losses, who are experiencing those types of mental health challenges. You don't really understand what that's like. Just be present. Just listen. And speaking of listening, I realize that there are people that are watching online. I'd spent a week in the Philippines this year, and so I understand there's someone watching from the Philippines. Hey, if I know you, it's good that you get to see me. I wish I could see you, but it's been my practice when we're streaming these things, not to mention who it is in the audience that asks a question, and to talk about your stuff, attaching your name with your stuff so that the online audience knows what it is that you're wanting to talk about, because I want to protect your anonymity as much as humanly possible, okay? So with that said, hopefully you'll feel like, if you would like to share, ask a question, or make a comment, you'll feel like you can do that without the entire World Wide Web getting in on your information that you would like to share. Now, before I get rolling here with anything else, I feel like maybe I've laid a few ground rules. What do you need from me, number one? Number two, from the people in this room, what do you need for this weekend to be successful in your mind? What do you need? Practical information, all right? That you need for this to be a success. Guidance, okay? Yeah, how we can help others who are struggling. And I think there are two components to that. So one is there is some practical guidance, right, as a piece of this, but the other thing is just psychoeducation. I started out by saying we don't all understand this. We don't all really appreciate where other people are and what they're experiencing. And so maybe me sharing some things with you will just help open up your eyes to what does this look like? And why is this happening to people? What else? What do you need? Success stories? Okay, yeah. Support. One of the things that I like about what I'm seeing, I've spoken about 100 times this year, mostly on these topics. And what I'm liking is it's opening up a door to further conversation among brethren, where they can sit down and they can talk about their hurts. Sounds very biblical, doesn't it? Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and following, where it talks about bearing one another's burdens to fulfill the law of Christ. Yes. Okay, yeah. Again, I think that comes to the psychoeducation piece. The things that I will share today, you're going to look internally and you're going to say, oh, that makes sense. What I do want you to hear, though, as I say that, because I'm going to share with you a bunch of symptoms, and you're going to see them on one of the screens, and you're going to think, oh, I got major depressive disorder, or I've got generalized anxiety disorder, or I've got agoraphobia, or I've got something like this, and you're going to maybe be so overwhelmed by what you see, and you're going to think, oh, man, I'm falling apart. And I would say, just because you have some of these symptoms does not mean that you have a clinical diagnosis, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So, but I do think that's important to be able to just kind of see, these are some of the symptoms. I'm experiencing some of that, and guess what? Doesn't mean I'm broken. Doesn't mean I'm not a good Christian, right? Doesn't mean I'm bad. Doesn't mean any of these things. Anything else? Yeah, and so a couple of things there. You said how it goes hand in hand with mental diagnosis. And so, like, alcohol use disorder is a mental illness. Substance use disorder is a mental illness. You ready for this? I'm just going to hold this as I say this. Caffeine use disorder is a real mental illness, okay? If you have coffee, it doesn't mean that you have caffeine use disorder. I'm just saying that it actually there is a clinical diagnosis. Okay, so these things are generally co-occurring with another disorder, like trauma, for instance. So we'll probably touch on some of that. Yes? Yeah, how you've been raised, but not only how you've been raised, what do genetics say about the why of your diagnosis? Because there is a relation there. All right, so all of the, yes, ma'am. Wasn't prepared for that one. It's how to tell the difference between dementia and other mental health issues. That's a really good one. I mean, dementia is a neurocognitive disorder. And so maybe we'll touch on that in a roundabout way, we'll see. And we could certainly have other conversations later through the weekend if you'd like. Yeah, some scripture that we can turn to, absolutely. This is not a gospel meeting, this is not a Bible lectureship, but I think it would be highly counterintuitive for us not to have intersection of scripture and the science component to it. So we'll definitely do that. All right. So with all of those things, I think we'll be able to make some connections to what you've shared with me and what you're needing. And if you're feeling a bit bereft of those points over the course of our time together, then let's talk. I don't mind standing here in between sessions while other people are taking a break. If you want to come and ask me a question, that'll be fine. I can do that. So we can definitely have some conversation in between if we need to. Okay, so let's get into talking about this first subject matter, embracing calm, coping with stress and anxiety. Now, if I had this title to rewrite, I would, and I wouldn't call it coping with stress and anxiety. I would really just call it coping with anxiety, because there's a difference between stress and anxiety. I'm up grading this morning a little after 5 a.m., and I had a student send me an email, and she's all concerned about a matter regarding her class, and she is stressed about it. When she comes through the end of the semester, when the assignments are behind her, that stress is going to go away. You know, stress is tied to an event or a situation. When that event is gone or that situation is gone, the stress goes away, okay? If it doesn't go away, then we're looking more at anxiety, okay? And so I'm going to focus really just primarily on anxiety. So, anxiety, normal or not normal? Well, depends, right? It depends. So let's start with an illustration. Who knows what this is? An abstract painting? No? Animal fur? Somebody said a grizzly bear. It must look like a grizzly bear, because I made this presentation 3 weeks ago and shared this image for the first time 3 weeks ago, and they said a grizzly bear. And I've never been face-to-face with a grizzly bear, but I have been face-to-face with this particular creature. Can you tell what it is now? It's a lion, right? So I actually took this picture in Tanzania, East Africa, and I've been going for over 25 years, and I've seen so many lions. And this is the closest I've been to a male lion in the bush. Now, usually when I see these lions, I'm in a safari truck. Okay, so I feel pretty protected, although I will say, my last trip, I took some free students with me. We popped the top off of the safari truck, and so there's big open space there. And there was a female lion walking right toward the truck, and she came right to the truck and then walked along the side of it. But if she wanted to, she could have jumped right on that truck and come into the vehicle. So imagine that you are on safari with me, you go on a trip with me, and we get out of the vehicle and we turn around, and there is a lion in the bush. Here's my counselor question. How does that make you feel? Fear? All right. Anxious? What else? Excited. All right. What are you going to do? You see the lion in the bush. You're going to try to run. All right. What'd you say? Get behind me? Okay. I used to be pretty fast as a runner. I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I can promise you that if we were on safari together and we ran into that, I could outrun you. Okay? And that's all that matters. Oh, but if it's you and me, I'm going to outrun you, and it doesn't matter whether or not I can outrun the line, right? Because he's going to get to you first. Oh, you're going to stand still. All right? So you might flee, run. You might freeze, stand still. You might fight. You're going to win. You're going to lose, right? You might faint, okay? So these are all possibilities. These are anxious responses to a moment in which you feel threatened. Would you say that's normal or not normal? Pretty normal, right? What about this? The Bible says in Matthew 6:25, I say to you, do not worry about your life. The American Standard Version says, don't be anxious. The King James Version says, don't take too much thought for or about. And so the Scripture says, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious about what you're going to put on. Don't be anxious about what you're going to eat. Although looking at those oats, that makes me a little anxious if that's all I have to eat. What you're going to drink, don't be anxious. So here's the thing. I believe that there are 3 types of anxiety in just the broadest sense of the terminology. I believe there's a completely normal, helpful anxiety, okay? When you are coming face to face with a threat, whether it's on the road and somebody pulls out in front of you and the amygdala in your brain causes an immediate reaction, and as a result of that reaction you swerve to avoid an accident, that is a helpful, anxious response, okay? There is some type of anxiety that's unnecessary, like worrying about what I'm going to wear, worrying about what I'm going to eat, worrying about what I'm going to drink. That's unnecessary anxiety because God tells me it's unnecessary, okay? He promises to take care of these things, okay? So that would be unnecessary. And then there is clinical anxiety. Clinical anxiety would be a neurosis. It's something that you have. We're going to talk more about the why, but it's something that you have that you really cannot control on your own, okay? So it's put you in a place where you have this constant fight, flight, freeze, faint response, and you're dealing with it most of the day, nearly every day, for weeks and months, okay? Uncontrollable. That's not what Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 6, okay? So a couple of reasons for sharing the illustration with you. One is I wanted you to have some small sense of what somebody that's dealing with clinical anxiety might be feeling. If you could put yourself in the shoes of being on that safari, getting out of the vehicle, turning around, and there, unbeknownst to you, is a lion in the bush. You're going to feel like you're about to pass out. You're going to feel like your heart's just racing, like you're working out, right? You're going to feel like you're going to fight. And that's how folks that have clinical anxiety feel just constantly. And it's beyond their control, okay? That's clinical. So, how would you respond to that? Somebody is dealing with a clinical level of anxiety. What would you say to them? You want to help them. Let's talk about it. I like that. Let's talk about it. What else? Okay, I'm here. Point them to resources. Good. What else? Don't talk them out of feeling the way they feel. Okay, good. And I heard one more. Yeah. These are so good, and you guys are spot on. And yet, can I tell you what some people will say? Pray about it. You need to pray more. You know, the Bible says that we are to store God's word in our heart. So let's read more scripture. If you're dealing with this clinical anxiety, if you're dealing with clinical depression or clinical fill in the blank, if you're dealing with these things, you just need to pray more and you need to read more. Now imagine that you're dealing with this stuff and that is my response to you. How does that make you feel? Worse. Why? Okay. So we're saying that if that they're feeling worse because we're telling them that the clinical issue that you're dealing with is your fault. All right? Think about this from a Christian perspective. Who is at your core? Christ. What is at your core? Suppose we could use a lot of words, but faith, right? That's your core. So your core is Jesus, your core is faith. That's who you are deep from within. And it drives your thoughts, your actions, of course your words. But you've got clinical anxiety. And I'm telling you to overcome that clinical anxiety, you need to read more, you need to pray more. Now I've just attacked your core. And if I attack your core, in essence, I'm attacking your sense of purpose. Right? What gets you up in the morning? What gets you going? What gives you hope? I've just taken it away from you. Now, in extreme cases, not so extreme from a clinical standpoint, but extreme in behavior is, okay, if I have no purpose to live, if this is all my fault, to use the language, then why do I want to keep living? That's why folks that are experiencing clinical level of care needs, one of the things that is a diagnostic criteria for depression in particular is suicidal ideation. Okay? Now, I will say, just a bit of a sidebar, that suicidal ideation or a thought of suicide does not make one suicidal. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I would be, if I were a betting person, I would be willing to wager a bet that that folks, even in this room or listening online, have thought something like, well, maybe it would just be better if I didn't wake up tomorrow. But yet there's no plan, there's no real desire that they don't wake up. It's a thought. It's an ideation. Does that make sense? And I will also say this, because I realize when we have conversations like this, and it's unusual to have conversations like this, the thought is, well, if somebody is feeling that way, this will put them over the top. And that's not what the research says. The research says the exact opposite. It's actually good to be having these conversations. It normalizes these kinds of thoughts. I don't mean to say that I want someone to experience these kinds of thoughts. I don't want anybody to feel like they'd be better off if they didn't wake up, or other people would be better off if they didn't wake up, or they've thought about just taking their life. I don't want anybody to think like that. But I want you to know that you're not broken, you're not evil, and you're not bad if you've had a thought like that. Okay? I think of 1 Kings 19, which we'll spend a little more time with. God, just take my life. Yeah, I think it's a great question. The question is, if somebody's experiencing clinical anxiety or clinical depression or some other mental illness, do you have to be careful about approaching them and talking with them maybe about this matter and others? And the answer is yes, but not too careful. You don't want to go down roads that you're not prepared to go down in conversation with them. But we shouldn't be so cautious that we say, okay, you're dealing with something that I can't possibly understand, that we then avoid them. Because now we've added as the expression goes, we've added insult to injury, because now they feel like they have the plague, you know. And so another factor in all of this, and we can see this throughout Scripture, is loneliness. And when there is an increase in loneliness, it increases their risk level. And so we don't want to contribute to that by being so standoffish that we're not present. And so you think about, and we'll talk more about this when it comes to the discussion on grief, Job did not need for his so-called friends to say a word. If they just showed up and were present when he was hurting, that would have been enough, right? And so we want to be mindful of not traveling down a road with somebody that's dealing with illness that we're not prepared to talk about, but it doesn't mean we can't be present. I liken it to physical conditions as well. If somebody is dealing with physical illness, let's say cancer, I'm not going to go and recommend a treatment plan for them. I'm not qualified for that. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to show up and just listen and be present. I think the same is true when we're dealing with these matters. So what I want you to remember is there's helpful anxiety. That's the kind of anxiety that keeps you alive, right? There is unnecessary anxiety, fretting, worrying about the things of this life that God said He's going to take care of. There's clinical anxiety. That's the thing that's beyond my control. Now, it's possible that the unnecessary, the things that I'm unnecessarily worried about, that I can get so in my head about that that it becomes almost a compulsion, right? Or an obsession, I should say. I'm so obsessed about this thing that it turns into a clinical level of care need. I've seen that happen, right? So over here, if it's not clinical, I can lean into God and say, yep, you know what, God, yep, you're right. You got this. I need to trust you in this. That's a level where God can help me. I can lean into Him. I get it, and then I just move on. But if I've become so obsessive about a matter to where it's just captured me and I cannot get out of it, then I need a little help. That becomes a clinical level of care need. Does that make sense? And so when you're over here in this space, you're wrestling and you're feeling like you're failing. Not your fault. Okay? And we're going to work through some of that. How? Well, I think we had a comment here about not, and I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but basically accepting their feelings. You know, it's not wrong to feel. Okay, a feeling is what I would say is amoral. It's not right or wrong, it just is. And so if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're glad, those are just feelings. Now, it's what you do with those feelings that can become problematic, right? And so if someone comes in and says, you know, I'm mad, or if they say, I'm mad at God, how should we respond to that? Well, don't be mad at God. It's not His fault. How is that going to make them feel? Is it true that it's not His fault? Well, yeah, true. It's not God's fault. But in that moment, how is that going to make them feel? Is that going to add anything? No, it's not going to help them. And so it would be far better to just acknowledge the way that they're feeling and be present with them in that feeling and letting them vent. In fact, that would be a very God thing to do. getting a little ahead of myself, but again, if you go back to 1 Kings 19, when Elijah is running away from Jezebel, what is he doing with his audience of one, which was God? He was complaining and sharing his feelings, and they were quite negative. And what did God do? He listened. He just listened. Now, at the end of that discourse, God gave him purpose. He gave him something to do. If I come to you and I'm just overwhelmed in emotion because of something, if I could sit with you and I could just pour it out, get it out. This is why talk therapy is so valuable, at least to some degree. If I could just get that out, now I'm not ruminating on all of this. And I can move on to hear what you might have to say of value that could help me identify a sense of purpose. Does that make sense? And so showing up, being present, listening, validating those feelings as real feelings, and not opening my mouth until it's a good time. All right. So, Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Be anxious for nothing, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. True? 100%. 100%. But if I have a clinical level of care need, if I have such a level of dysfunction that I can't work, I can't interact socially with my friends and family, it impacts me physically, so forth and so on. We'll look at these symptoms. But if I have all of this stuff going on, it may be really difficult to hear these words, much less accept them. It doesn't make them any less true. They're still true, but I may not be ready to hear them. And that's okay. That's all right. And so some of the things that I will share today and tomorrow, you may be in a place where you're not ready to hear it. I'm okay with that. But I'm putting it in your heart so that when you are at the point where you can hear it, it'll be there. Okay? I am not in any way, would never want to take away from the reality of any suffering that you may be experiencing as a result of mental unwellness. Okay? It's real. Trust me, it's real. And it may be that Philippians 4, 6, and 7 does not speak to you right now. I get that. Believe me. Doesn't make it any less important and valuable to share. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the brain. I could really geek out over this, but I'm not, okay? Do my best, in other words. But there are two regions of the brain that are really important to understand when it comes to anxiety. Okay, primarily I would say the amygdala and the cortex region of the brain. The amygdala is the alarm system triggering the fight, flight, freeze response. The cortex is the reasoning center that helps to evaluate and calm responses. There is a really good YouTube video that I would commend to you. It's Dr. Dan Siegel, and he walks you through what he has developed that he calls the hand model of the brain, a handy model of the brain. And instead of going around and speaking and bringing this life-size plastic model of the brain, which can become somewhat cumbersome traveling with, especially through an airport, he said, I'll just do it with my hand. And so if you were to take your hand and close it like this, it's as though your head is facing this way. This would be the cortex region of your brain, okay? So if we opened up, which we won't do, that would be gross, but if we opened up and we looked right on the gray matter, that would be the cortex region of your brain. We open it up, and you see the thumb here. Really, you would want two thumbs there, but most of us don't have two thumbs on our hand. But if you were to do this, it would constitute the limbic area of your brain, okay? And then if you open that up, you have your brain stem, and then you notice if your hand's like mine, you've got little lines in your hands. Those look like neural pathways. Well, they don't look like neural pathways, but they kind of symbolize neural pathways in your brain. Communication, and then of course the brainstem, and then the spinal cord. Okay, and so basically the brainstem area is really important for that fight-flight component of the nervous system. Okay, now your central nervous system has multiple systems attached to it. One of them is the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is really cool, not only from a standpoint of understanding, but also helping when you're in a moment of panic or really suffering from anxiety to the point that you're feeling that fight, flight, freeze response. Okay? So the autonomic nervous system, two primary parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is activated when you inhale. So when you take a breath, immediately, you're not going to feel this because it's so fast, but immediately it triggers a fight-flight response of your autonomic nervous system. Okay? When you exhale, that triggers the parasympathetic nervous system and the rest digest component of the autonomic nervous system. And so when you exhale, it calms you. Now, if you're dealing with anxiety or panic, I'm going to invite you to intentionally breathe in a particular way. I'm not going to invite you to breathe because you do that all the time. But you don't breathe like this. Breathe in for about 4 seconds, hold it for about 6 seconds, and exhale for about 8 seconds. We call that box breathing. It's a weird shaped box, so 4, 6, 8. Okay? Now, I don't want anybody to hyperventilate. If 4, 6, 8 doesn't work for you, then you do what works for you. But the whole point of that is you want to exhale longer than you inhale, because as you exhale, you are intentionally activating your parasympathetic nervous system and you calm yourself. And when I have clients that are dealing with anxiety, and we'll provide them with a toolkit of resources to help them with anxiety, they always seem to come back saying that the breathing technique helps me more than anything else. And everything that I share with you from a standpoint of help aids are going to be evidence-based, okay? So these are not things that I'm just coming up with out of my hat, but they're things that the research supports as these are evidence-based practices that will help with anxiety or depression or whatever it is that we talk about, okay? So that just happens to be one. Well, when you activate this anxious response, that fight-flight response, that's your brainstem. The limbic area of your brain, okay, that's where your amygdala is. Amygdala is a plural term, so you actually have two of them. If you put a finger in your eye, which I don't recommend, but if you put a finger in your eye and a finger in your ear, and they were to intersect in your brain, that's where your amygdala is, okay? And that's sort of the emotional seat of your brain. It's also a place where things like attachment happens. It's where the hippocampus is, memory, okay, all of those things. The cortex area of your brain has some lobes, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, so it's bringing in things that you experience from the outside world, things that you hear, things that you see, the parietal lobe, the things that you touch, and what the cortex is doing is it's just making maps of all of this outside world, okay? And then the prefrontal cortex of the brain, it integrates the whole thing. It integrates your thoughts, it integrates your emotions, it integrates your memories, okay? It integrates the body. So hopefully, I said I wasn't going to geek out over this. I think I crossed the line. The point is, because of the integration, the more you know about the brain, the more you can connect these dots, then the more it helps you in overcoming anxiety in particular, okay? And so I would recommend that little video. Just look up Dan Siegel, hand model of the brain, and I think you'll find it of benefit. So the amygdala and anxiety, amygdala detects the threat, it activates immediate responses. it can become oversensitive and trigger false alarms. So for instance, imagine that we're on a hike. I'm looking forward to the break. I'm going to Virginia. I'm going to do some hiking on the Appalachian Trail, which I enjoy doing. And imagine that you're with me and we're hiking the AT. And while we're hiking, all of a sudden I hear something and I say, oh, that's a bear. The bear's coming to get us. Okay, just immediately, that's my thought. Are there bears on the AT? Yes, I used to live 20 minutes from a trailhead, and we had a 250-pound black bear in our backyard. They're there, okay? Is it possible that there's a bear on the AT, that the sound that I heard was a bear? It's possible, but my guttural response is there's a bear and it's going to come and eat me. All right, that's the amygdala. It's become a little overreactive, would you say? Now, here's the thing about it. Remember I said that your amygdala is part of that limbic area of your brain. If it is hyperactive, okay, say it heats up, do you think your cortex, the thinking part of your brain likes that? No. You ever heard the expression, flip your lid? Now, you can't really do that. I mean, it's not possible. But you get the idea. This amygdala region of your brain becomes so hot, okay, that it affects the cortex area of your brain that you just don't think rationally. And so in that moment where my amygdala is overreacting, I can't think through properly why I shouldn't overreact about that situation. Does that make sense? And then if you think about the cortex part of your brain, the cortex processes information and applies reason. It can struggle to calm the amygdala, as I just said, when it's overreactive. And so that's why it's important to, on a regular basis, before you get into that moment on the AT and you hear that sound out there and your amygdala starts to work overtime, just kind of constantly in your part of your process, think about calming things, such as how that we can trust the Lord with our heart and how He can direct our paths. Things like that can help our cortex. So the amygdala base, just remember that it is the emotional and reactive component. Cortex base is the cognitive and worry-driven component. And then just recognize which dominates in your own brain. Do you overthink things? Okay, does that cause you anxiety? Do you deal with obsessions over things? Do you have compulsions to overcome those obsessions? Okay, I'm not saying that you have obsessive compulsive disorder or an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, but you can still obsess about things and then have compulsions to compensate for those things. If that's the case for you, if you're a worrier, kind of a thinking worrier, it's a cortex-based anxiety. If every sound triggers your fight-flight response, that amygdala-based response, then you have an amygdala-based anxiety. So more specifically, amygdala-based is that intense, immediate fear response. That would be like a phobia or a panic attack, okay? If you have a cortex-based anxiety, that's driven by the what if. What if I drive from here to Atlanta and I know that if I drive from here to Atlanta, I'm going to have a car accident and I'm going to get hurt. I know that's going to happen. That's a cortex-based anxiety, okay? Generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, a health anxiety, all of these are types of cortex-based anxieties. And I see some of you taking pictures, and it's great. I'm totally happy to share these slides with anybody that wants them, okay? So, where does all this come from? That was one of the questions, the why. Why do we have cortex anxiety? Why do we have amygdala anxiety, okay? Well, understanding the history of it can be incredibly helpful. So I've broken this down into two parts, what we call endogenous and exogenous. Endogenous from within, exogenous from without. Okay? And so as we think about that, the internal issues, could be genetics. So I'm going to try to use this little fancy, thought I wasn't going to use this thing, didn't you? It's never going to get around to this. Okay, so if I'm meeting with a client, then I might do what's called a genogram, and let's just say that is so cool. Let's just say that this is my client. The square represents male, okay? And my client has symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, and I'm going to talk more about symptoms in just a minute. But they have symptoms. Okay? I'm not convinced that they have it yet. We're just first meeting. I'm just doing an intake, gathering some history. Well, one of the things I'm going to ask is, tell me about your family. Okay? And so this line, I guess there's a way of pointing other than just the old-fashioned just pointing. I just got to do that. I need a laser pointer. Okay. Well, if you were to point, it's not that critical. But if you were to look at this. Oh man, we're all prepared here. This is awesome. Okay, cool. Now, but the only problem with this is I've got to go here, and I've got to go here, and I've got to go here. Y'all got to get that figured out. So if you can see this line, it just represents a current union, marriage, okay? The square, the circle, female, square, male. If I were to do a line like this, it would represent a break in the union, such as divorce. If I were to do a square like that, it would represent death. Okay, and then we just can go on from that. So we could do like, here's a sister, here's another sister. We could go up here like this. These are grandparents, let's say. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out information specifically about mom and about dad, because these are first degree relatives, all right? Does dad, or did dad have a history of any mental illness? Agoraphobia, separation anxiety, generalized anxiety, any type of anxiety in particular. Maybe depression, any history of depressive disorder. Okay, what about mom? So with these being first degree relatives, anytime you have a first degree relative, it increases the likelihood of you having a disorder, an anxiety disorder. It doesn't mean that you have to have one, it just increases the likelihood. And so if I'm seeing symptoms and then I find out we have a first degree relative with anxiety, I'm going to say, okay, that increases your chances, it increases your likelihood, okay? But then there also could be a neurotransmitter disruption. Now, you've heard of things like dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and so forth. So these neurotransmitters are how neurons communicate with one another. And you've got neurons in your brain, obviously, and you've got neurons around your heart and around your gut. That's when we call them a heart brain and a gut brain, because they have neurons in there. Well, your neurons communicate by way of these neurotransmitters across a synapse. And sometimes there's a disruption, or maybe there is a lack of a certain type of neurotransmitter, and then that can result in depression or anxiety or some other form of mental illness. And so there are things that we can do that don't include medication to adjust neurotransmission, but sometimes all of the interventions that we try, they're not enough. And so we might introduce an SSRI or an SNRI, some type of psychotropic medication. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a forever thing. It just means that right now, it's like your brain is here, and so we're not able to do some of the talk therapy work that we want to do. We're just not as successful in it, and so we kind of need to bring the brain to the table so that now you can better take in what it is that we're trying to do in therapy. And again, it doesn't mean that that's a forever thing. I mean, the ideal situation is no medication whatsoever. I mean, that's ideal. I don't know anybody that would just disagree with that, just all, out of hand. No medication. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, who wants to take medication all the time, right? I walked into the kitchen, and I noticed right next to our refrigerator, there is a medicine box, and I'm not kidding you, it's about this big, with all of these, little lids that you open up, and I thought, oh, Emily, that's my wife. Emily, we are officially there. Notice I didn't use the O word. We are officially there, okay? Well, who wants to do that? Who wants to have one of those things and then travel with that and have all of these medications? Nobody wants that, okay? But sometimes it's necessary. And so you're not going to hear from me that, any type of psychotropic medication is wrong. I know there may even be people in the audience that feel that way. Be happy to have further conversation with you about that, but you're not going to hear that from me. I know that in some situations, it's a necessity, okay? And so the next best case scenario is it's temporary. We're able to do the work. We come off of the medication, okay, with the doctor's assistance, obviously, and then we're good, okay? That's kind of the ideal situation. There are, absolutely. And so that's something that can be done further with, doctors. I'm not on the medication side of things, just to be clear. That would be outside of my scope of practice. The only thing that makes me a little bit unique from a therapeutic standpoint is I do have a background in neuroanatomy and psychopharmacology, and so I have a little better idea of how psychotropic medications work with the brain. Obviously, physical conditions can be endogenous factors. I don't really have a lot of time to go into all of those. Exogenous factors, social environmental factors. I know we're talking about anxiety, but let me bring up bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder, there are two types, bipolar 1, bipolar 2. Bipolar 1 disorder is one where there's going to be an identifiable manic episode, okay? And then there's also going to be the expectation of medication, and there's also going to be the expectation of hospital visitation, okay? Bipolar 1 is going to be the stronger diagnosis of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Now, you don't really need to know all of that, but the reason I'm bringing it up is, I remember sitting in class, knowing a little bit about bipolar disorder. This is in my master's program, and I said to the professor, I said, if a client or a patient is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, doesn't that mean that they're always going to have that? And I remember Dr. Hannah, she said, no, why would it? I don't know. You tell me. I just thought it was. And then I met someone that went to a therapist, and they were diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And in being diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, they actually were taking medication. Bipolar 1, it's a definite. Bipolar 2, it's possible. But they were taking medication for bipolar 2, and then their environment changed. When their environment changed, their symptoms went away, and they went off the medication. And if they were to go see another therapist, and the therapist were to do a complete intake with them, there would be no evidence that they had bipolar 2 disorder, with the exception of looking at a previous chart. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes social and environmental factors influence whether or not a diagnosis of a mental illness exists. And when that environment changes, then those symptoms change. The diagnosis can change. Once you have a diagnosis, doesn't mean you always have that diagnosis, if that makes sense. Substances, yes, please. Well, so now we're getting into managed care, the whole insurance questions and things of that nature. This is why I don't take insurance. I don't have to submit to insurance company and for billing purposes, one. And number two, I don't have to worry about a client always having that diagnosis attached to them, if that makes sense. And so I tell clients that I will diagnose you, but my diagnosis is not for reimbursement. My diagnosis is to better understand the kind of treatment plan that we ought to develop to give you the highest level of care, right? Well, as far as it being written down, it's written down and it's documented, and so it's there. But if you were to come to me, like if this person were to come, this happened to be a friend, but if this person were to come to me and as a client, and we diagnosed, and then the environment changed, they come back, say 2 or 3 years later, they just want to do a check-in, and I'm like, you're not even the same person. Tell me about this. What's different? Well, now they are bipolar 2 in remission, you know, so it's that situation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure. Well, and that's why it should never be what's going on in that moment. It's what's going on over a given period of time, like 2 weeks or 6 months, depending on what the diagnosis is. And so in understanding that, you know, we can help identify, okay, do you meet the criteria for a diagnosis? You know this, that diagnosing, I tell my students this, I teach diagnostic and treatment planning, and I tell them that diagnosing mental illness is as much about art as it is about science. And if I were to see you, let's just say you're a client, you come in and I meet with you, you may come in with a diagnosis and I'm like, okay, I don't want to know what that diagnosis is. I want to do my own work. And now, after I've done my own work, now I'm interested in knowing that diagnosis, okay? And I tell my students in practicum, the experiential component of the program where they're actually meeting with clients, I tell them that you're going to inherit clients or patients, depending on the setting that they're in. You're going to inherit people that your colleagues have already seen, they've already slapped diagnoses on, and you're going to sit down and you're going to meet with them and you're going to think, what I'm seeing does not match the diagnostic criteria. And I want them, you give me a substantiated diagnosis, your substantiated diagnosis. And then we might have a rule-out diagnosis, which could be something that somebody else brought up. But I want your substantiated diagnosis. You've met with them the most recently. So. Yeah. Right. And just as a point of clarity, there are tests to look for, you know, certain levels of neurotransmitters. There's not scientific tests where we can actually, well, we can do brain scans and see what areas of the brain are activated based on this going on, or if someone presents with anxiety, what does their brain scan look like as opposed to someone that has no anxiety presentation. But it's not like a broken arm where we can put you on the scanner and see, okay, there's a broken arm. I can't open up your head and look at your brain and say, okay, this is what we've got going on. So from that standpoint, that's why I say it's as much art as it is science. There's some things scientifically that we can do and determine what's going on. And then there are other things that it's just objective and subjective data that we get from what we see and what the client reports to us. And just as a bit of a side, so when someone comes in and they're being treated by a managed care provider that has to submit things to insurance, here's the gist of it. They have to have a level of dysfunction that keeps them from being able to, to work, to engage in life. They've got to have the symptoms that align with the diagnostic criteria, so they've got to have all of that, with the expectation that we can move them from this level of dysfunction into a level of functioning that they enjoyed before they started having these symptoms. And then we've got to come up with some goals that if we meet these goals, the expectation is that we remove the problem and increase their level of functioning. So that's kind of a really short explanation of what we're doing in managed care. So substances, legal, illegal, these include amphetamines, other stimulants, diet medications, appetite suppressants, certain asthma medications, decongestants, obviously cocaine, caffeine, and steroids. All of these can be exogenous factors. All right, here's what I want to do. You've listened so well for just over an hour now. I'm going to give you about a 5-minute break, okay? If you need a little longer than that, no problem. Kind of drifting back in, but I'm going to give you about a 5-minute break, and then we'll start right back up, okay? All right, so obviously we've spent a lot of time with this. I really don't want to be done with this topic yet, because there are 3 areas of concern primarily that we deal with. They are anxiety, depression, and addiction. Those are the 3 main areas of concern from a mental health standpoint. I've been asked to talk about anxiety and depression, and then we've tacked on some other topics as well. And it's all interrelated, obviously. But I just don't want to be done with the discussion on anxiety yet. Okay, there is going to be some overlap between anxiety and depression. You've already seen some of that. So I may skip over a little bit of content there. And as I said, I'm happy to share these slides with you if you want them, and there are even some references here if you want to do some of your own research as well. Let me just roll through some of these symptoms. Feeling nervous, restless, or tense, these are anxiety symptoms. Having a sense of impending danger or panic, an increased heart rate, rapid breathing, sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired, trouble concentrating or thinking about anything other than the present worry, trouble sleeping, gastrointestinal problems, difficulty controlling the worry, the urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety, feelings of depersonalization. Have you ever heard someone say that when they're sort of in crisis mode with a mental health concern, that they don't feel like they're in their own body, feel like they're up here looking down? That's a real thing. Depersonalization, agitation, hot flashes, frequent urination, dizziness. What did I do here? There we go. Okay, so hopefully what you've been able to identify is, well, we've got all kinds of physical things going on here. Well, that's right. There are physical symptoms that often happen as a result of a mental health challenge. And so when I'm meeting with someone, one of the first things that I will ask them is, when's the last time you've had a full physical? And if they say, well, I haven't had a physical in 20 years, I'm going to say, what in the world's wrong with you? No, I wouldn't say that. See, my job is to create a therapeutic alliance. There's got to be a level of comfortability there, so I'm not going to be unkind. But I'm going to say, you know what, it's been a while since you've checked in with your doctor and you've had a full physical. We really want to do that. And why would we do that? Well, because biology trumps psychology. Not that psychology is not important, obviously, but biology trumps psychology. It could be the case that we are dealing with some mental health related issues as a result of a physical condition that hasn't been identified. And once we solve that physical condition, the mental health stuff goes away, okay? So we're going to approach that first. Now, if they've done all of that, their blood work's good, no physical health challenges, then that's telling me, okay, we've got something else going on, okay? We've got a psychological situation going on here that we want to address. Now, there are a lot of diagnosable anxiety disorders. Separation anxiety disorder, most of you have probably heard of that one. Selective mutism may be one that you've not heard of, just continual failure to speak in one social situation, but you're able to speak in others. That would be selective mutism. Social anxiety, this is probably one of the most common types. It's where you're just really struggling in social situations. And that's not the same as being an introvert, okay? I'm an introvert. You may say, well, you're standing up in front of me talking. Yeah, and this is uncomfortable for me. I'm just being honest. It's uncomfortable because I'm an introvert. But there's no such thing as 100% introvert or 100% extrovert. Okay, we all have some level of introversion, extroversion. We just lean more in one direction or the other. And so what something like this will do for me, my introversion does not keep me from speaking to you. My introversion will result in me being utterly exhausted by spending a lot of time around people. So I don't know if any of you go to polishing the pulpit, but I started going to polishing the pulpit when there were just a few of us in a room. I loved it, and now there are thousands of people in a room. I know this is being streamed. Still love it, but it's a lot harder on me than it was when there were just a few of us in the room. And before I really went down the road of understanding introversion, extroversion, I thought, what is wrong with me? Do I not like people? Do I not want to be around people? Why am I so exhausted when I'm around all of these people? And I started to understand that, hey, you're normal. You're just an introvert. And when you're around all of these people, it just wears you out. So step away. Okay, recharge your battery, be by yourself, just recharge your battery a little bit, and then go back out and be around a little more people. I often wondered, as a preacher for 30 years, I wondered, why is it at the end of the day on Sunday when what I did maybe was teach a class and preach twice, why was I so exhausted at the end of the day? It just didn't make sense to me. Why didn't I want to spend time with people at the end of the day on Sunday? Go out. When I spoke 3 hours. Well, it's being around all the people. That's what did it to me. Well, being an introvert is not the same as social anxiety disorder. Okay? Panic disorder, unexpected, recurring panic attacks, agoraphobia. Extreme anxiety about at least 2 specific situations: enclosed spaces, crowds, public transit, open spaces. Can you imagine being a Christian with agoraphobia and one of the places that they just can't go is the worship assembly? It brings new meaning to the word sacrifice, or worship, which is sacrifice, and where people they may not be able to assemble 3 hours or 4 hours a week. The best that they maybe are able to do at this point in their journey with this particular disorder is once a month. You think about just that word worship, which is a sacrifice, okay? Brings new meaning to that for me. Generalized anxiety disorder, extreme anxiety occurring the majority of days for 6 months or more about varying events, activities. If you looked at these symptoms and you thought, I've got all of those symptoms, but it's just occasionally, and it's just been going on for a week or so, you may just be stressed out about something, okay? We're talking about having these symptoms most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 6 months. And if that's what's happening, then we want to consider talking to a professional. It's not a respecter of persons. That's one of the things I want you to know about all of these issues. Mental illness is not a respecter of persons. I like to say that we are all one significant event or one series of events away from finding ourselves in a place that we said we would never be. Not to describe my father as one who has been diagnosed with mental illness, but when we lost my mother at 57 to cancer, he changed. He was a different person. Again, not mental illness, but I'm just making the point that a significant event can change a person. And this could happen to any of us. And it has, and it does. Treatment approach, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here other than just to say that treatment approaches include things like medication, talk therapy, a combination, and certainly you want to work with your primary care physician and a therapist on these matters. What I would impress upon our hearts is that God cares about us, that you just can't control everything. And if you have a cortex-based anxiety, then you're about control, and you can't control everything. Impossible. Give it to God and trust His ability to hold it for you. You have a Father in heaven that cares about you. Again, I realize if you have a clinical level of care need and you're not there to receive this, just allow me to put this in your heart, lock it there, so that you can come back and revisit it when you're ready. Okay, so is it possible to change? 100%. How would God, or why would God say, to be anxious for nothing if it was an impossibility? He wouldn't say that. Well, He makes it possible through something that we call neuroplasticity. You didn't know neuroplasticity was in the Bible, did you? But the principle is there. Your brain has the ability to change, okay? And so God created us with this capacity for healing and renewal. When I meet with clients, it's from the perspective of a person-centered therapy. Person-centered therapy was developed by Carl Rogers, and I don't know a therapist that doesn't utilize some element of person-centered therapy. And Dr. Rogers believed that everyone was created good. Of course, I don't believe anyone was born with inherited sin, but I also know that there's one good, and that's Jesus. But we have the capacity to do good, right? And so we also have the capacity to self-heal, which Dr. Rogers would say. What you and I know is that we have the capacity to self-heal because God gave us that capacity. But sometimes, because of what's going on in our life, it's hard to identify the how. How do we do this? And that's where someone comes alongside of you and just through positive regard, empathy, genuineness, they sit with us and they help us to find our ability to self-heal when we're dealing with difficulty. Make sense? And so when you think about different types of therapy, well, it depends on if you've got amygdala or cortex-based anxiety. If you have an amygdala-based anxiety, that emotional component, this idea of exposure therapy really helps. So if you were scared to death of elevators, I don't mean to smile to make light of that because maybe someone here is scared to death of elevators. But if you're scared to death of elevators, do you suppose that if you were to walk into a building and walk past an elevator that you might panic? Yeah, you might. If you're frightened of elevators. And so are you going to get on the elevator? No. You're not going to feel safe at all. Okay? So exposure therapy would be a gradual process of bringing you into a building where there's an elevator, bringing you near to the elevator door, pressing the button to open the door, getting on the elevator, getting off the elevator, getting on the elevator, riding up a floor, down a floor, and then just continually going through that process into where you're now able to ride an elevator. Okay? And so that would be exposure therapy. That's just one example. What we're trying to do is we're trying to retrain the amygdala to associate safety and not danger. All right? Mindfulness and meditation. You maybe see this and think to yourself, that, well, that's New Ageism. That's Hinduism. And what I would say is, nope, that's God. That's Christianity. I really don't like the fact that we allow people and world religions to rob us of good biblical concepts and terminology. And this happens to be one. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we have this awesome ability to use our brain in incredible ways. and it includes mindfulness and meditation, right? And so what I would have you do is, I would have you do a mindfulness exercise where you imagine yourself being in a place that is your favorite place to be in, even though you're not there, and using your 5 senses to take you there, okay? I was speaking in Africa, and we were talking about mindfulness, and I invited one of the Africans who spoke very good English to come up and allow me to demonstrate a mindfulness exercise with him for the audience. And I thought he was just going to share with me a place somewhere there in Africa that he visited and just really loved. And it doesn't have to be an amazing place. I mean, it could be your house. Your house is amazing to you, or a room in your house, but just some place where you find peace and comfort, whatever. And I thought, that's what he's going to do, just some awesome place there in Africa. You know which place he picked? Sevierville, Tennessee. He has made a few trips over to America, to the U.S., and he just happened to have been in town for polishing the pulpit before my visit to Africa, and so that was what was on his mind. I said, okay, well, that's your favorite place. None of these other Africans have ever been to Sevierville, Tennessee, and so they're getting ready to go with us. And so I had him sit down. He was nice and comfortable, and I said, okay, I want you to share with us 5 things that you see. Imagining that you're in Sevierville, what are 5 things that you see? And with as much detail as you can possibly describe it, what are 5 things that you see? And he would describe the Ferris wheel. He would describe the people that he would see walking on the sidewalks. He would describe the mountains. Right? So he would describe all of these things with a lot of detail. Okay, what are 4 things that you feel? I don't mean emotionally, I mean physically. 4 things that you feel. Well, I feel the cup of coffee in my hand, the warmth of that ceramic coffee mug. I feel the concrete beneath my feet as I walk. I feel the sunlight on my face. Okay, so just go through that exercise. What are 3 things that you hear? I hear laughter. I hear the go-karts. Right? I hear all of these things. What are 2 things that you smell? I smell the exhaust from those go-karts. I smell waffle cake. What's one thing that you taste? I taste barbecue. That's what I taste. So anyway, we go through that process. And then I would ask the Africans in the room, do you feel like, this is being translated in Swahili, do you feel like you have been to Sevierville, Tennessee? And they were nodding. It's like they went to the U.S. and they went to Sevierville, Tennessee, and they experienced what that place was like. And I asked my friend, I said, tell me how you're feeling right now. Very calm, very relaxed. And as I've even described, in not a very great way, but as I've described Sevierville, you may be feeling a sense of calmness and relaxation even yourself right now. But imagine you thinking about your favorite place when you're dealing with anxiety, how you might feel. Sometimes clients are dealing with anxiety specifically as it's attached to their job, and so what I'll have them do is, before they get to their place of work, I want them to pull off into a parking lot, and I want them to sit there, and I want them to work through this mindfulness exercise before they get to work. Or after work, if they've had a day, before you get home. You don't want to bite your family's head off. You know you're dealing with some anxiety stuff going on at work. Let's just pull off. We're going to do some exercises. Maybe it's a breathing exercise. Maybe it's a mindfulness exercise. And you're going to do that before you go home. Okay? Relaxation techniques. I talked a little bit about the mindfulness, obviously. I've talked about the breathing, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. There's also progressive muscle relaxation. But then there's the cortex-based strategies. And I'll just hit on this quickly. So we've got to replace thoughts. It's about reframing. So a negative thought, I'm going to fail. I'm a failure. Well, you've got to challenge and reframe that. Okay? So I'm going to do the work. If the work's challenging, I can handle it. I can do a workaround. Okay? So you start to reframe the negative thought into a more positive outlook. And from a brain standpoint, you've got, remember I mentioned those neural pathways? If you have a history of negative thinking, then you're creating one negative neural pathway after another. And so what we want to do is we want to slowly replace those, or a better way of saying it is we want to slowly implant positive neural pathways so that, and continue to do that so that they start to overtake the negative neural pathways. All right? Okay. I'm getting ready to shift into the depression piece, followed by the grief piece after that. I'm okay where we're at on time, so don't feel like, oh man, he's gone way over and he's going to get into my lunchtime. I'm not, I promise. You might, but I'm not. Maybe you've got a question as I figure out how to transition this into the depression piece. Any questions or comments? You'll have to speak up because I'm going to have to look down at this to figure this out. There we go. I figured it out. Nobody? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's talk a little bit about depression. So 50 descriptions from 50 people with depression. I just wanted to share with you the top 5. Depression is seeing no future and no answer for any of the problems in your life. That's pretty low. When you have depression, nothing is enjoyable. Nothing can make you smile. It feels like you're a ghost, not a part of the real world. It's like drowning, except you can see everyone around you breathing. Remember the depersonalization piece? Here's one that I found of interest, especially. Depression is a dark, inescapable place. It's like being locked in a room with no light, no windows, no door. It's so dark that you can't even see your hands in front of your face, let alone find your way out. That's depression. And so where I want us to focus our attention again is understanding a bit of the history, symptoms, we'll intersect scripture, some examples, and then some intervention. Okay? So first of all, just like with anxiety, it's helpful to understand, what is the causal factors of this? Okay? Why do I have depression? Again, just like with anxiety. From an endogenous standpoint, there are the genetic and biological side of depression. If you have a relative with a mental illness, it increases your likelihood greatly. Okay? Doesn't mean that you're going to have a mental illness. You may come from a line of folks that have struggled with mental illness, and somehow you've been able to change that narrative, okay? And that's great. But for everybody, it doesn't work that way. And that's okay too, because it doesn't mean it always has to be that way, okay? There are things that we can do to help. Neurotransmitter disruption, same thing as we said before, so none of that content has changed. And then, of course, there can be some medical conditions that result in depression. So let me share with you what some of those would actually be, if I can figure out this. All right, so medical conditions would include things like autoimmune disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, neurological disorders like from Parkinson's, hormonal irregularities. All of these actually can contribute to unipolar depression or major depressive disorder, right? And then the exogenous piece, the social environmental factors, these stressors, also grief, they can contribute to depression. When we talk about grief, one of the things I'll mention is that there's complex grief or prolonged grief disorder. And with this type of situation, you're dealing with not normal grief, okay? So grief is normal, but grief that turns into major depressive disorder, that is not the normal process. And so we would end up having a complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder. That can be an environmental or a social factor that causes major depressive disorder. Medications, recreational drug use, alcohol, lorazepam, antihypertensive meds, some antihistamines, these things can be exogenous causes of depression. What are the symptoms? Sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, hopelessness, anger or outburst, irritability, frustration, that over small matters, loss of interest or pleasure in most of all normal activities, sleep disturbances, including insomnia or sleeping too much, tiredness, lack of energy. So even the small tasks take extra effort, reduced appetite and weight loss, or increased cravings for food and weight gain, anxiety, agitation, or restlessness, slowed thinking, speaking, or bodily movements. And so what you're seeing here is you may have a presentation of anxiety, but if you were to come see me through our process of intake, I might discover that, while you do have some symptoms of anxiety, that's not a primary diagnosis. Now, we could have a comorbid diagnosis, meaning you could have major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, or you could just have major depressive disorder with anxious features. Okay? So that's a possibility. So there is some overlap here. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt, fixating on past failures or self-blame. If you've gone to your primary care physician, I would say in the last 7 years, then there are two brief assessments that you've probably received. One is the PHQ-9 and the other is the GAD-7. The PHQ-9 is the Patient Health Questionnaire, which really brings to light depressive symptoms. The GAD-7 stands for Generalized Anxiety Disorder. 7 is the number of questions, and that kind of focuses more on anxiety. If you have a high score on either the PHQ or the GAD, it doesn't mean that you have depression or that you have anxiety. It just means that over the last couple of weeks, you've had some increased symptoms. I'll tell you a personal story. So I was trying to meet with a new doctor in Virginia. We had just moved there, and of course go in for the initial intake, and I had to fill out a PHQ, had to fill out the GAD-7. I don't remember what I put on those, what I scored. I do remember that during that period of time, I had a lot of stress, not anxiety, I had a lot of stress, a lot of stuff going on. And I remember the doctor asking me about that. I said, yeah, I got a lot of stuff on my plate right now, and so I'm kind of stressed about it. And I may have done like most of us do and use stress and anxiety interchangeably, which they are different, as I identified earlier, but even I slipped up and used them interchangeably, probably, as I was talking to him. So I get on my patient portal after this meeting, and I look, and lo and behold, I have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. And so now in my record, it says you've been diagnosed with a mental illness. And I was quite angry. I was angry not because I have a problem with being diagnosed with a mental illness, if I in fact have a mental illness. I was angry over the fact that we spent 15 minutes together, and I told you about some of the stress that was going on, but I didn't have a level of dysfunction, which is a primary component to being able to diagnose someone with a mental illness. They have to have a level of dysfunction. heightened level of dysfunction. And so I contacted the doctor and I said, you got to fix this. You messed up. And he did. My concern was, I'm a licensed pilot. I've been a pilot for over 20 years. And my concern was, in particular during this time, that was going to have some type of a negative impact on my ability to continue flying. I didn't know that it would. I hadn't done any research on that, but it was a concern. And so I had to have a conversation with him about that. Now, the reason I brought that up is just because you have some of these features, some of these symptoms, it doesn't mean that you have a mental health diagnosis, okay? Frequent or recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, or suicide. Unexplained physical problems such as back pain or headaches. Some of the different types of depression include disruptive mood dysregulation. This would be temper outbursts in children that are incongruent with the situation. So every kid gets upset, right? Every kid has outbursts, at least to some degree. But is it congruent with the situation that they're in? Major depressive disorder. This is where you're dealing with these symptoms, the bulk of these symptoms, most of the day, nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. That's the difference between generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder, we're looking at a 6-month span. Depression, we're looking at a 2-week period. Now, if it is 2 years, we're talking about dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder. I'm going to skip through this because I've really talked about all of these things. So what do we do from a standpoint of treatment? So from a standpoint of treatment, again, we're talking about therapy, medication, and possibly both. I want to say this. I've talked a little bit about medication. You know, I'm not, my idea is best case scenario, no medication. Best case. Possible case scenario, we have to add medication. No problem with that. Personally, no problem with that. Ideally, if that happens, we want to come off the medication. If we can't, we have to stay on it, fine. What I don't like seeing is an individual that gets on a medication and the medication is the therapy. I don't like seeing that. And I know that in a room this size, it is quite possible that that describes your case. And I understand. But that's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is to have the medication as needed and to continue to do the therapy so that in an ideal world, we can come off the medication if that's a possibility. May not be a possibility, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. If it's not a possibility, it's not a possibility. But if it is, ideally, we want to come off of that. Okay? What's that? Sure. So light therapy. Did I put that up here? I don't remember. Anyway, so light therapy is what we often start to see used during this time of year and going into the winter months because of when it's cold and if you're like me, you don't want to be outside in the cold, but yet you love to be outside. You're not outside getting the vitamins that you need from the sunlight. And so we might introduce certain lights into the home where they can shine on you, and it sort of takes the place of that sunlight that you would normally get if you were outside. So seasonal affective disorder is the disorder that sometimes people will experience. It's a depressive disorder, and they'll experience it more this time of year and going more into the winter months. Cognitive behavioral therapy, oh yeah, there it is, light therapy. Solution-focused therapy, person-centered therapy, which I mentioned earlier. Medication sometimes is an option. A primary role is to attempt to restore normal biological functioning. Remember, what we're talking about is we're talking about a neurotransmitter disruption. And we're trying to regulate that. We're trying to restore some biological functioning there.
All right, I've already talked about this, so I'm going to skip over this part. So, okay. I think I understand what you're asking. The question is this the same that has you follow the light? I think what you're talking about is a therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is a therapy that some folks are super pumped about. I'm trained in it for treating anxiety and trauma. That's sort of the design behind it, specifically is to treat trauma. And it uses what's called bilateral stimulation. So anytime you move your eye across the center plane, like your nose, when you move your eyes like that, you've got this bilateral stimulation happening in your brain. And when we activate your brain in that way, we're able to work on those traumatic thoughts and try to ingrain new ways of thinking so that you don't go back to the trauma, but you go to that new way of thinking. It's a way of creating more positive neural pathways in your brain. And so I think it's a great treatment for trauma. It's great for anxiety. I find it to be helpful for obsessive compulsive disorders. So I think that's what you were talking about. So what if we could normalize depression? I don't want to make depression normal. Well, I get that from the sense that we don't want people to have depression, but people have depression, and people are going to have depression. So what if we could just normalize the thoughts? I think about passages like Psalm 43 and verse 5, where David said, "O my soul, why art thou cast down? O my soul, why art thou disquieted within me?" Have you ever felt like that? Just from the depths of who you are on the inside, just feeling pressed down by life, depressed? What about Paul? 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 4, he said, "We that are in this tabernacle," or this tent, or this earthly dwelling place, our body, "we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened." I heard a story about a fellow a Christian, I think he was a preacher, and he had experienced a significant loss, and he was beside himself with the loss. And he went out into the field, and he laid down between the rows in the field, and he just started dumping dirt on his head, and he was screaming out to God. You ever felt like that? Well, that's normal. What about Matthew 26 and verse 38? When Jesus said, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful and nigh unto death." I think about the prayer posture of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account. If you look at them in reversal order, Jesus goes to his knee in prayer in Luke's account. In Mark's account, it's as if he's on all fours praying. In Matthew's account, Jesus' face touches the dirt. And so in that moment, when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's about to enter into the place of Golgotha, where he'll be crucified, he's prostrate in the garden. And just think about that imagery. David, Paul, Jesus himself, in my mind, they all normalize to some degree depressive thoughts. And then I think about individuals in the Bible that had depressive symptoms. Now, don't hear from me that these 5 individuals, Saul, Judas, Job, Jeremiah, and Elijah, that they had unipolar depression or major depressive disorder. Okay? I'm not saying that. What I am saying is they had depressive symptoms. Anybody in this room may have at some point, maybe even today, some depressive symptoms, but it doesn't mean that you have depressive disorder, okay? Let's look at 1 Kings 19. I teased that out earlier, but let's look at 1 Kings 19. Let's think about Elijah for a second. I just want you to to observe this about this man of God. Of course, he's responsible for the death of these false prophets, and Jezebel said, the same thing is going to happen to you that happened to these prophets. And so Elijah hears it and he runs away. Verse number 4 says, "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree and requested for himself that he might die, and said, 'It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers.'" Now it had just said in verses 2 and 3 that he is afraid. So what are symptoms of depression? Fear, that's a symptom. Suicidal thoughts, the word suicide is not used here. Suicidal ideation is not here. But I think we could make a good case in what he said where it says, "I requested for myself that I might die." That sounds like an ideation to me. We keep going. "As he lay and slept under a juniper tree." Okay, he's having some issues with his sleeping. Look at verse 6. "And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again." Again, you can see the sleeping issue. You can see the eating issue. He needs someone to feed him. Second time, "Arise and eat." He's having to be encouraged to eat. And he rose and he did eat, and he drinks. And then if we were to continue here, look at verse 10. "And he said, I've been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And watch this, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." There's this idea that he is the only one who's trying to do right, and he's alone. Loneliness. We could look at more, but over and over we have symptoms of depression. Again, I'm not saying Elijah had major depressive disorder. I'm just saying he had some symptoms. And the point in all of this is just to say that if you've got symptoms, if you're struggling, maybe you have depression, it's okay. Not that I want you to stay there, mind you, but it's okay. You're not bad. You're not evil. Okay? You're not broken. The change is possible. And just having the conversation is a big part of starting that process. And hopefully the next step is getting the care and the help that you need. I can tell you that at this point in my clinical work, the majority of the people that I see now are members of the church. I quit counting how many churches that I have seen people from at about 25, I think it was. And it's way past that number now. These are our brethren. And yet they're dealing with some very heavy things. And when they come and see me, they say, "You know, Neil, I felt like that if I came to see, if I went to see a therapist, it was an indication that I was weak, that I wasn't strong, not strong enough to deal with this." And I always tell them the same thing. You know what? The fact that you have dealt with this for so long by yourself is an indication of how strong you are. And I want you to know how much I value the opportunity to just come alongside you and just to keep working with you. I mean, you've done so much work yourself. You need a little help. I'm grateful to be that person to help. And so that's where we started. And I remind them that as Christians, you know, as a professional clinical mental health counselor, I'm not to be engaged in the process of Christian therapy, because I'm not a licensed Christian therapist. I'm a licensed therapist who's a Christian, but there's a difference, and I have to be mindful of those boundaries. But I always tell people, or ask people, if I think there's a verse that might be applicable here, I'll say, "Hey, look, you know my background. You know, I was a minister for 30 years. You know my background, and would you mind if I shared a scripture here?" I've never had anyone, certainly from the church, but even outside of the church, I've never had anyone say no. And I believe that God's word won't return to him void. So, and I believe that Scripture is powerful. Okay? And if there's a moment where I can share that, I will. But I remind folks that even in Scripture, these awesome, amazing people, they even had some depressive symptoms. And so if you do, you're in good company. You're in good company. All right, I've talked a lot about some of the symptoms, treatment, examples. I'm going to give you some practical application in just a moment, but maybe you've got a question or a comment here before I move further. Yes, sir. Okay. So let me try to answer that question this way. The question is about dysfunction. To what degree is that dysfunction? Could one area of your life, if I'm understanding the question, one area of your life is dysfunctional, does that imply that you have enough dysfunction that you would be diagnosed with the disorder? Is that what I'm understanding? Okay. Let me, I've messed something up here, I think. No, that's not it. All right, I've done something. Thus we have this. So I believe that we have multiple domains. Okay? So there's the physical domain, there's the psychological domain, there's the social domain, and there's the spiritual domain. All right? And these are the four distinct domains that make us who we are as people. The physical domain is not just the body, but it's everything that we could put in a physical category. Your house, your finances, your body from a standpoint of its wellness. So anything, car, anything that would go in a physical domain is here. Psychological, this is your emotion, this is your cognitive ability, your thinking. Social, obviously your relationships. Spiritual is what you believe, knowing why you believe it, being able to defend that, and then living that belief. And when one of these domains is, here's a clinical term for you, is out of whack. When one of these domains is not as it should be, then life satisfaction goes down because our life's just out of balance. And this is a theory, actually, that it's called IBA, Individualized Balanced Awareness. It was developed by Dr. Shannon Barnes. I had the privilege of working with her in her practice as an intern and doing research, utilizing this theory to treat clients. And what we found was when a client came in with, let's say, a depressed emotion, symptoms of depression, we would discover that maybe they dealt with some pain. Remember from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that pain is a symptom of depression. We also observed that maybe their finances were a little off. Maybe they were low. They were struggling to make ends meet. So let's just take this one as an example. So they come in, they have depressive symptoms, and we try to find out, okay, when did this start? Well, this started back in April. Okay, what's going on in April? Well, in April, I got hit with a really big tax bill. I wasn't expecting it. I guess I just didn't handle my taxes very well, and I got hit with this big tax bill. And then, in addition to that, I lost my job. And so I had a nest egg, but man, here we are in December, and I just keep eating away at that nest egg. Well, can you see why it would result in some depressive symptoms over here because of the financial situation that they found themselves in? Now let's add to that. Can you think of how this might impact other domains? If they're feeling depressed, are they going to want to engage socially? If you're dealing with pain as a result of maybe a position that you're having in life and that's causing depression or adding to the depression, if you're hurting, are you going to want to engage socially? Well, you know the answer to these. No, obviously. But you're a Christian. What is a really important component to Christianity? Relationship, right? Connection. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity, Psalm 133:1, right? But I'm not doing that. So now how am I feeling about my faith? Not too good, because I'm not hanging out with people. But I'm not hanging out with people because I don't feel good, right? And I'm not and I don't feel good, so I'm not hanging out with people. So it's constantly back and forth. So what I'm saying is, we're looking for such a significant level of dysfunction that it impacts our ability to engage maybe spiritually, socially. Not obviously, it's affecting our mindset. Maybe we've got some pain here. Okay. Now, what I will say in this process is that there is a level of judgment on the clinician's part. And so I've worked with clients where, man, they've got all the stuff, but they're still doing their job. They're taking care of their family. They're going to church. They're, putting on a happy face. They've got all the other symptoms. I mean, every single symptom. Been dealing with it for 2 weeks, solid, most of the day, nearly every day. They got all the stuff. And so now I'm thinking, okay, and imagine that I'm taking insurance where I have to be able to write that they've got such a severe level of dysfunction that it warrants you paying me as an insurance company. Then I've got to make some judgment there that says, you know what? They've got all the symptoms. They've got enough of a level of dysfunction that they're coming in to spend whatever it is financially to see me, to provide them some help. And this is where they were, functionally speaking, before all this stuff started in April. And I think that we can help them get back there, and if we can have these goals. And so that's what we're going to try to do. Does that make sense? That was a long answer to a very good question. Another question? Yes. Talking about electro. What are you talking about? Yeah, electric shock therapy. So I'm not sure that I want to answer that question. Just from confidentiality is really important. But I'm familiar with the therapy. It's used to treat trauma, depression, primarily. So,
that they
sure.
they're doing something wrong.
Yeah. So I want to kind of address some of this Sunday morning in my sermon. So the short answer to the question is, we'll see if it's a short answer. If someone is experiencing guilt and shame, my word was shame, I added that, guilt and shame as a result of this, is that normal? Why does that happen? You know, that's kind of what you're asking, as I understand it. And I think part of it is I'm a Christian and I shouldn't be depressed. So I think that's part of it, right? I have a sermon that I preached, and I intentionally labeled it the Christian and depression, because there is this mindset that if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be depressed. Christians are, after all, supposed to be the happiest people on the planet. And they don't even have to go to Disney World for it to be that way, right? And while it's true that Christians have the most to live for and the most to be excited about, because they understand they're only here for a brief period of time, and then it's heaven. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I think, as we've identified, there are things that are going on that are beyond our ability to control. I can't control if I have a lower level of neurotransmitter that is required for excitement and happiness. You know, there may be things that I can do to influence that once I learn what those things are, whether it's certain activities, behaviors, types of exercises, mindfulness, medication. But until I even understand that, how could I possibly do those things, right? I got to know better before I can do better, as the saying goes. But some Christians feel like, well, I just shouldn't be depressed, and therefore what's wrong with me as a Christian? I'm dealing with depression. And so there's guilt there. And then sometimes there's shame attached to that, because a family member is having to, probably not the right word, they're having to, is choosing to, getting to come along our side and really help us. And maybe they're challenged by that. Maybe it has created some struggles and challenges in their own life. Maybe it's impacted the relationship in various ways. And so there's shame that we feel like we're a burden to someone, right? And so there's shame attached to that. And that's why I said in the outset of the day that this is why I love the fact that we're doing this, is we're trying to take that stigma away. If I have major depression, that's not my fault. It's like if somebody has cancer, it's like saying, well, it's your fault. You know, would we ever say that? No. Why? Because we don't believe it. Same is true about this, or should be. And so being able and willing to open up and talk about this, and even after I'm gone, to actually have dialogue among yourselves and say, you know what he was talking about, I haven't told anybody, but I've been seeing a therapist because I've got depression. I think those kinds of things are important to talk about. I don't mind disclosing this to you, and sometimes it comes up, the question is asked about myself and about whether or not I've been on the other side of it, and the answer is yes. What I tell my students is, I can't demand this, but some universities require this. Go get your own therapy. If you're going to be a therapist, go get your own therapy to see what it's like on the other side. And so I had a couple of things that I was really struggling to work out, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to practice what I preach. And I'm going to contact a therapist, and I did. And I was a knucklehead about it. I did not tell the therapist that I was a therapist or that I was a therapist educator, counselor educator. And then when I finally disclosed that, she fussed at me, and rightfully so. But I've been on the other side. I'm telling you, it's okay. That's why I went through the whole list of folks that have had these depressive symptoms, including Jesus. You know? To try to normalize, to take away some of that guilt and that shame that might be there when we're struggling. Other question? Yeah, 100%. You know, it'd be kind of horrible to show up and say, you know, you're violating this passage, or, you know, we're withdrawing from you because you haven't been around for 6 months, or whatever it is. Don't you think we owe it to our family, which is we're brethren, we're family, to number one, not let it get 6 months, and number two, find out what's going on in their lives. Find out what's going on. One of the neatest things that we did as a church, we were a small congregation, about 115 up in Virginia, and one of the neatest things that we did is we changed things up a little bit so that we would have more interaction in one another's homes. And so we would come together. You know, we would have our corporate worship as God authorizes, or as the Bible authorizes and commands for us to have on the Lord's Day. And one Sunday night, what we would do is we would have like a class. We call it family Bible class. And so everybody was in the auditorium, young people on up, and we would have class together. One Sunday night, we had a more typical worship, as has been sort of tradition over the years. One Sunday night, we would have singing, fourth Sunday night. But one of those Sunday nights, what we would do is, under the leadership of our elders and myself, as a facilitator of discussion, we would meet in homes, and then we would have also a group that would meet at the church building, and we would have a piece of paper that had the sermon notes, and one of the leaders of the church would go through those notes, and we would spend an hour or so on that. And then we would have time to pray together, and we would talk about specific things that we needed to pray for in our own lives. And then we would have snacks or eat. I like to smoke meat, and so if they came to my house, a lot of times it was barbecue. And you know what we found was that people didn't come on Sunday, that Sunday evening, people didn't come into the home and spend an hour. But I had to kick people out of my house. Isn't that horrible? But they might stay at the house for 4 hours. And what was cool about that was not only the time we spent together, but it continued over the course of the week. And so people were getting together, and they were having lunch together, they were hanging out and playing games together during the week. I mean, the church was behaving a lot more like the church of the first century in Acts chapter 2, who were what? Continuing with one another daily. And then what happened to them from an evangelistic standpoint? People were being baptized daily, Acts 2 and verse 47. So my point in sharing all of that was an answer to the question is, we need to be in one another's lives. To the extent that we feel more comfortable sharing. Some people don't feel comfortable sharing physical illness, much less sharing emotional struggles that they're dealing with. And yet, those are just as impactful and significant and in need of care and prayer as the physical maladies that we deal with. But I'm not going to feel comfortable enough, even if I see you 3 or 4 times a week, I'm not going to feel comfortable enough sharing any of that with you if the only time we spend together is Bible class and worship, because we don't really know one another. Does that make sense? Does that answer? Okay. I promised you 2 breaks. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then in 5 minutes I'm starting whether you're here or not. Okay? We're going to work through this last topic of grief. So about a 5-minute break. So 11:28, according to Apple. All right. So here we go. I want to just hit a couple of things here by way of, what can we do if we're struggling with depression? Then I want to roll right into the discussion on grief, okay? So some practical and biblical suggestions for addressing the symptoms. Number 1, express. Express your heart to God. How do you do that? What does that look like practically? Journal. One of the things that we often encourage our clients to do when they're struggling with their emotions is we might get them to log their mood throughout the day. And if we can find some times during the day where their mood is especially low, we can discuss what's surrounding that time of the day for them, their activities, who they're engaged with, the relationships, etc. So we can kind of better understand that. So it might be just logging your emotions at a certain time of the day, but it also may be where we're just expressing our heart to God, our difficulties, but also our joys. And we're just keeping track of that, okay? That can be helpful. Practice gratitude. Say thank you to God and to others. Don't underestimate the power of gratitude. There's been a lot of research on that. Be kind. Do intentional acts of kindness. Meditate on good things. Meditate on good things. Sometimes it's hard to identify when we're in the throes of depression. It's hard to identify what some of those good things are. But Psalm 68 in verse 19 says, "Blessed be the Lord who daily loads us with benefits, even the God of our salvation." And that passage is telling us that God, number 1, He's the giver of benefits. You can't get any better than God. Number 2, God daily blesses us. Number 3, God daily loads us with benefits or blessings. So throughout the day, God is loading me with blessings. And so trying to identify 1 or 2 of those, and then just thinking about them. What is it about today that makes today worth a living? Let me just find a couple. And then just meditate on it. Spend time with healthy people. What I find is a lot of times folks that are struggling with mental health issues, they lean in to like-minded people, right? And so if this person is dealing with depression, who are they spending most of their time with? Somebody else is dealing with depression. Now, from a Christian perspective, obviously, I want us to be present and show up. But if we are struggling with it, then let's lean into some healthy people until we're in a better spot where we can show up for someone else that's struggling. It's that whole principle of you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? And so you allow someone to pour into you that's healthy so that you in turn can pour into someone else once you're healthy. And then, of course, showing up for others. Compassionate service changes moods. Okay. Now what did I do last time here? Not that. This is so cool. I just wish that I knew exactly how to work it. Not that. I don't know. Thank you. Yeah, put it on the session 3. There we go. Perfect. Okay. This is really cool technology, by the way. I like it. How do you find grief? How would you define grief? Sadness over a loss. What kind of loss? An overwhelming loss. Okay? What kind of overwhelming loss? Okay? Death. Any other overwhelming loss that can lead to profound sadness? Divorce? Loss of anything? Loss of job? Could be retirement, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, not to, please understand that when you experience a loss, your experience is your experience, and my experience is my experience. I know what it's like to lose a mother. I don't know what it's like for you to have lost your mother. I know what it's like to lose a child. I don't know what it's like for you to lose a child. Does that make sense? And so I'm not trying to make our losses sound as though that it's all equal. Okay? It's only equal in the extent that we equally understand what it's like to go through loss. And whether it is the significant loss of a loved one, or it's the significant loss of a relationship or a job, your experience is going to be different than mine. You know, if I've been thinking a lot about retirement lately. I don't know why, but I just have been. And there's a part of me that's really excited about it. You know, it's going to be here before I know it, and I'm really excited about it. But there's another part of me that says, I don't know if I want to retire. And maybe I'm thinking, as I'm sitting here analyzing myself talking, my wife gave me a T-shirt that says, "Keep talking because I'm diagnosing you." I don't wear that in public. But as I'm sitting here thinking about myself and why maybe I've been thinking more about retirement, you know, I left full-time local work in July of last year. So I was in full-time pulpit work for almost 30 years. And when I stepped away from that to move to Freed-Hardeman to work full-time with the university as a professor, my first month of attending the local church, we attend Estes if you're familiar with the area, my first month of attending the congregation was not good. Not from the standpoint of, you know, the worship was not good, the preaching was not fantastic, the relationships we were starting to make were not good. It's like, what is my role here? I always knew what my role was. I mean, every time I went to the church house on Sunday, I knew what I was supposed to be doing. But that all changed. And that first month was really hard. The first 6 months were tough. Now and again, I have those thoughts, but by and large, it's sort of in the past. That's grief. There was a significant change in life, loss of something that I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed preaching. I just thought that I wanted to do something different. And but anyway, so these are some of the ways that we would define grief. Here is how the American Psychological Association would define it, and of course they get a little wordy, but the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. Grief is often disguised from bereavement and mourning. Not all bereavements result in a strong grief response, and not all grief is given public expression. Grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. Intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. I can't help but just sit here and think, as I'm sharing this, that I'm not an expert on grief. I've taught a course on it one time, but it's not my course. I was filling in for someone for a semester. And as I was teaching it, I thought, this is just not my area of interest. I mean academically. But I was also thinking about the fact that I'm not an expert, as I was saying earlier, on your grief. And how we experience this is going to be different. But hopefully we can help one another as we share a bit together. I've sort of condensed this. It's a multidimensional psychological and spiritual response to loss. If I bring the spiritual component in, involving these 4 domains: physical, psychological, social, spiritual. And I do believe, even though this was the brainchild of Dr. Barnes, I do believe in these domains and how that when they're out of balance, life satisfaction goes down. But if you can bring them into balance, life satisfaction goes up. Okay? And you can see how that a significant loss that affects your social domain, how it can impact you psychologically, the way you think, the way you feel, and could even impact your relationship with God, at least in the moment, right? Questioning God. It can certainly result in some physical situations. When my mom, and I hope you don't mind me disclosing a bit, but when my mom was ill, things changed around the house. And I lived hours away. I couldn't be home all the time. And my mom was being treated in Texas. And of course, they lived in Collierville, outside of Memphis. And things around the house changed. I remember the day that the visitation was happening for my mom. A lot of church folks came to the house and did some outside landscaping work at the house, which was just wonderful, okay? But a lot of that stuff took a back seat during that time. So what I'm saying is loss affects us emotionally, even our physical domain, and of course it can even impact us on a spiritual level. That's what grief does. It's all encompassing. Normal grief is a natural and adaptive response to loss. What I'm saying is it's normal to grieve. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign that you're broken. It's normal. But normal grief also implies that there is abnormal grief. And by abnormal grief, we're talking about complex grief or prolonged grief. I've worked in two situations, not just 2 clients, but 2 situations where someone will experience a loss and they are self-aware enough to say, this is a significant loss. I know me, and I know of other situations where folks have not grieved properly, and as a result of that, their grief, the intensity, I should say, of that grief lasted in a protracted way. I don't want that to be me. And so they'll come to counseling, and they'll spend some time working with a therapist. I've done this, working with a therapist to give them some tools, right? To be heard about their significant loss. And then there are situations where the individual does not grieve in any kind of a systematic way. And as a result of that, it might result in a prolonged grief with a diagnosis added to the grief of like depression. Okay, I'll speak to you again personally. So when my mom died, we buried her on Memorial Day, and it was our custom to always have Christmas in the mountains, in Gatlinburg. And so there had been many months since when we had buried my mom, and between that time and December, when we were doing Christmas, I was there for my dad, my younger brother, and my younger sister. And they were constantly coming to me and talking to me. And early on, my dad, of course, obviously really struggling. And then he had such a position that he could live anywhere in the world as long as there was an airport nearby. And so he decided, I'm just going to move back to Missouri, where he grew up, where his parents were living. And he was going to move back there. He's going to be present for them. And then when he needed to go to the airport, he'd just drive to St. Louis or Memphis. And he starts to develop a relationship with a woman, member of the church there, who had never been married before, no kids, nothing like my mother, which was fine. And they developed this relationship, and they started to really enjoy one another's company. And my brother and sister they didn't like this, and they were talking to me about this, and I said, look, what's most important? That she's a faithful Christian, and that she makes Dad happy. Isn't that most important? Isn't that what matters most? And so they're like, yeah, that's right. And so I'm there, I'm showing up, right? Not showing up for me, just showing up for everybody else. And we go to Christmas in Gatlinburg. It's going to be the last Christmas that we do that. We're changing traditions because Mom's gone now. And my dad says to me, this is late at night. You don't want to talk to me late at night. I'm an early bed, early to rise. So my dad's talking to me, and he wants to talk to me about this new woman. And I let my dad have it. That's uncharacteristic of me. And I told him that you've had several months of time in which you've been going through this process. I have only just begun. I've only just started this process. I remember sitting in my chair, my recliner. My wife made me get rid of my recliner. It's still a touchy point for me, especially during football season. But I had to get rid of my recliner. But anyway, I'm sitting in my recliner, and we're watching a movie together, myself and that little bitty one, and then my son, who's a little bit bigger. And then, of course, my wife is there. And we're watching the movie Up. I can't even mention that movie without it starting to make me feel this way on the inside. But we're watching the movie Up. And I just started crying, sobbing uncontrollably. And I'm not typically like that. And it freaked them out. And so my wife's over here, she's standing next to the chair. My kids are like, what's wrong with Dad? And they're climbing up in my lap, and they're trying to be there present for me. And I just can't stop the crying. I just can't stop. Now, I'm saying all this to say we're different. And sometimes we deal with our grief on the front end. And, we have emotions, we have grief, we have mourning, and I don't think it ever completely leaves us, right? I think it's kind of part of the human experience. But and then sometimes we just suppress it. We don't try to think about it at all. We just ignore that anything has happened. Maybe we're just showing up for everybody else. We don't take care of ourselves in that process, and as a result of that, we might deal with depression. And I think maybe I was dealing with a little bit of that at that point. Does that make sense? So let's talk a little bit about a clinical and biblical understanding of this idea of grief. And I want to talk about two individuals, Kubler-Ross and Worley. But of course, you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief. Most everybody has heard of this. course, Dr. Kubler-Ross, she was a psychiatrist. She was a Swiss psychiatrist, experienced seeing some horrible things in the Second World War, moves back to the U.S., or moves to the U.S., and was working in New York, and she was seeing all of these folks in the hospitals that were just, they were nearing death, but they weren't being taken care of. And it was horrific to her. And so she starts to interview these people for her book, for her research about death and dying, the dying experience and life after death and things of that nature. And so from all of this experience that she has, she develops this 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And as you think about these 5 stages of grief, I want you to understand that they are not as neat and orderly as they may appear. And usually they appear in a circle. If you've ever seen them, that usually they're in a circle, and it's like just denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Well, you might be at denial, and then you might jump down to acceptance. And then you might back up to anger, and then to bargaining, right? And so it doesn't always follow a nice, neat pattern. And she would even say that as well. And so that's one area. Then there's William Worden. And William Worden was a psychologist, and he experienced the significant loss of his wife. I think it was in the 50s or 60s. And as a result of that significant loss, he started to do his own work. And he came up with not stages, but he came up with 4 tasks of mourning. And the first task is accept the reality of the loss. And in bereavement theory, acceptance means cognitively acknowledging that the loved one is not going to return. And I would probably think that if you've never experienced a loss before, then that doesn't make sense to you. You may be thinking, well, obviously, they're not going to return. But if you've experienced a significant loss, sometimes that's just not there, right? I'll remember, I hope I never forget this, because it was a very surreal moment, kind of funny in a way. I took it that way. But I remember being in my car, and I pulled out my phone. This was before the no texting and driving law. Not that it was a wise thing to do, but anyway. So I pick up my phone, and I'm dialing my mom. 901-828-1588. I still remember her cell phone number. And I dialed my mom, and it rang. And then it hit me. Wait, she's gone. So in my mind, there's this struggle over, is she really gone? Is she really not going to answer that call? Now, I knew she was gone. But there was a part of me that just didn't get it. I'm going to say, does that make sense? But it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. But if you've experienced loss, then yes, it makes sense to you. And so as soon as that happened, I laughed. And I could just see my mom laughing, and her way of laughing was very contagious, and I could just see her doing the same thing. And then I called my dad. I said, you're not going to believe what I just did. I just called Mom. I think he had some smart aleck response. Playful, I mean, there's no issue with me and my dad. Hope I haven't come across that way. But it seems like he said something like, well, did she answer? No, she didn't answer. But this task is an acceptance of that reality. Task 2 is processing the pain and the grief. Avoidance of emotional pain can prolong or complicate grief. Expressing grief through things like talking and journaling, prayer, those types of things can really be helpful in expressing sorrow, maybe fear, or even disappointment. Task number 3 is adjusting to a world without the loved one. And that includes external adjustments, daily functioning, internal adjustments, self-identity, spiritual adjustments, your belief system. Paul said in Philippians 4 and verse 11, whatever circumstance you find yourself in, learn to be content. And so that's a part of that task. And then task number 4, finding an enduring connection while moving forward. And I really like Warden's comment there about moving forward, because sometimes people will say, and they mean well, they'll say things like, well, you had your mom for however many years, you had your spouse for however many years, 30 years, 40 years. What do you want more than anything else in the world? Another 30 years, another 40 years, right? And so while they're trying to be helpful, they're really not. They're being hurtful. Someone will say, well, you know what? You've mourned for a while now it's time to move on. And I don't like that one probably the most, because what does move on imply? Forget about them. It's as if they never even existed. I don't like that at all. I love my mother. I don't ever want to forget about her. My daughter, who's not on social media, she got on my wife's Facebook page, and my mother still has an active Facebook account. I say active, it's there. And my daughter posted on her Facebook page. My mother's birthday was, it's always the week of Thanksgiving. And sometimes we'll have red velvet cake and think about Mom, because that was her favorite cake. And we happened to be in New York during Thanksgiving, and went to Junior's, and my wife ordered red velvet cheesecake. And so I'm sitting here thinking about Mom, and now I'm talking to my daughter about her grandma, and my daughter posts on her Facebook page, my mom's Facebook page, that I'm sorry I didn't get to know you that well, but I'm hearing about you all the time. I'm getting to know you in that way, or something like that is basically what she said. And that's true. We have not moved on. We have moved forward. And I think it's a much better way of thinking about that. Because the past informs the present and the future, right? It's unrealistic to try and return to a pre-grief stage, Warden would say, but there's also the sense in which mourning is never finished, the continual part of the process. What is biblical mourning? It's a human experience void of spiritual weakness, but a reflection of love. It is not weakness to mourn. If it is, Jesus was weak. Jesus wept. Now we can get in a whole theological debate over the why of his weeping. Was he weeping because he lost a friend? Or was he weeping because he was going to have to bring a friend back from paradise? I tend to believe in the latter, but that's just me. But Jesus wept. Psalm 6 and verse 6, I'm weary with my groaning all night. I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with my tears. What does grief do? Well, it impacts us physiologically as well as psychologically. There is the reality that morbidity is also increased following the death of a loved one, including cardiovascular events, vascular disease, incidents of cancer, and self-reported hypertension. I'm going to give you just a personal reflection. So my grandfather died 2 years ago. I believe it was 2 years ago. 95, I think. There's good genes in the Ritchie family. He was 95. My great-grandma, we buried her at 107. And so I told you I was thinking about retirement. So one of the things I've been thinking about is, okay, how long does my money need to last when I retire? It's a real concern. So we buried him a couple of years ago. The research would indicate, my grandma was still living, the research would indicate that there's an increased likelihood of my grandma following him in death fairly soon, okay? Not in every case, but it increases the likelihood, if that makes sense. But here's my thought. My grandma, who we actually buried the Saturday before Thanksgiving of this year, or 2 Saturdays before Thanksgiving, and she struggled with dementia. And she did not really know her husband. I mean, she knew he was familiar, but a lot of times it was that guy. And so she didn't really know and appreciate all that he was going through, his passing and so forth. It just wasn't there 100% of the time, okay? And my thought is that might have contributed to her living as long as she did, because she was not in good health. But I think some of that contributed to the longevity of her life post his death. Just my theory. It may not be accurate at all, but fatigue, eating habits, sleep disturbance, difficulty concentrating, these are all things that are impacted by grief. And it's because of how the brain, the limbic area of the brain particularly, is activated during the time of grief. The human stress response, the fight, flight, freeze, faint reaction, that's there during a time of grief. We've talked about that. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 4 says there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. So what? Grief is normal. It's a part of life. Okay. Now, I told you we would end there. I want to be true to that commitment. And so the rest of this is up to you. Are there any myths of grief? What might they be? Okay, she spoke up, so she has prolonged this process. Okay, so now it's all on her. Okay, so you like how I did that there? So myths about grief. That just so happens to be number 1 on my list. A prize, yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't come prepared. Time heals all wounds, absolutely. Strong Christians shouldn't grieve. That's another myth about it. What about this one? Grief follows predictable stages. All of those are myths concerning grief. What I want us to know, just in closing, is that grief and faith, grief plus faith, is normal. Remember my affliction and roaming, the wormwood and the gall. My soul still remembers and sinks within me. And so my suggestions are pray and lament. Grieve, hurt, mourn. And talk to God. Share with Him your pain. Share with Him your anger. Share with Him your questions. If there's anybody that can handle it, it's Him. Journal. Write. Share with yourself or your future self, or maybe even a family member, your memories, your reflections, your hurts, your joys. Engage in restorative practices. What are some things that you can do to reinvest in yourself? It could be the fact that you are grieving not only the significant loss of a loved one, but maybe even you're grieving a loss of a sense of purpose. So many times an individual has laid to rest a family member but has spent months, if not years, taking care of that individual. That was their purpose, and that purpose has changed. So engage in restorative practices, finding a sense of purpose again. Counseling can be very helpful during this time, and then support groups. Healing is communal. I love to hear about churches that have developed some support groups where maybe they're not official counseling groups, but they're just support groups where people come together and they talk about their loss, they talk about their experiences, talk about their missed loved one, and so on. All right. Well, I appreciate so much your good attention, and the questions, the comments, everything that you've shared. I know it's been a blessing to me, and hopefully it's been helpful, at least to some degree, for all of us. I'll be here for a few minutes. If anybody wants to come up and share anything with me, you're more than welcome to do that. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the Lord's Day. We're going to talk some about boundaries during the Bible class hour. I'm going to preach a sermon tomorrow morning from 1 John, where we're going to walk through and talk about assurance, because a lot of us deal with guilt and concern over ourselves and the sins that we commit, and whether or not we're sure we're going to heaven, and how that can have an impact on us emotionally. And so we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about developing a sense of community so that we can build and strengthen one another when our hearts are heavy. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. But if it's all right, I've already given some finals, and they'll be turning those in over the next few days. And I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but we put a lot of essay questions in there. And so the computer system doesn't grade the whole test automatically. We have to sit and actually read all of those questions. And yeah, and papers, we give them kind of to the last minute to get those papers turned in and read all of those. And again, I don't know why we do that to ourselves, but we do. And we do it every semester, and that's okay. But I'm one of these that I really enjoy reading through these assignments and just kind of seeing how the students grow, what they've learned in the process, and that's really exciting. But before we get into all of that next week, when I get home this evening, I've got to stay up all night smoking meat for a faculty get-together that we have during the holiday season. And so I'll be up smoking pork butts for several hours. And I told my wife last night, I said, I need you to do me a favor. You've got to put this rub on the meat for me. Could you please do that for me? She didn't like doing that sort of thing. And so she was willing to do it, and she took care of that, and then we'll get home and we'll start smoking that meat later tonight. There's a Bob Newhart clip. How many of you are familiar with Bob Newhart? Okay, so we got a few. There's a Bob Newhart clip, comedian, on YouTube, and you can watch this. And he is playing the role of a therapist. I don't know if he's playing the role of a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist exactly, but some type of therapeutic situation. And he charges not a lot. I think it's like $5 for 15 minutes of time. It's something, very, very small. And he says that I don't give change. And so if I can solve your problem in 5 minutes and you pay me $5, then I'm not going to give you change for the balance of the time. I mean, you're welcome to stay and we can work on something else for the rest of your time. Well, this person comes in for a session and he says, okay, what's your problem? And she says, well, my problem is I'm afraid of being buried alive in a box. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of being buried alive in a box. And he said, okay, well, I think we can solve this problem. I'm going to give you 2 words, and these 2 words should solve your problem. And then you can go about your day. And she starts to take out her notepad. And he says, I don't think you need the notepad. I don't think you really need to write this down. I think you can remember it. Most people can remember this. But she pulls it out anyway. And he says, okay, you ready? STOPIT. Stop it. He said, that's it? Yeah, just stop it. You're afraid of being buried alive in a box. Well, just stop it. And she thought, well, okay. And then she just sat on that for a bit, and she said to him, I've got some other stuff that I need to work on. And okay, what else do you need to work on? Well, I've got this situation where I'm just constantly washing my hands. I'm just washing my hands all of the time. And he said, well, that's perfectly normal. I mean, I've got a sink over here and germs are everywhere. I wash my hands all the time. He said, don't worry about that. And then she said, well, I've got this other matter. And he said, hold on. I think I can solve whatever the other concerns are that you're having. Okay, you ready? Just a few words. Stop it, or I'm going to bury you alive in a box. Well, he's probably not a very good therapist, I would think. And not all therapists are, and not all treatment interventions are great interventions. The same, should be the same intervention for everybody, okay? But there's one thing that is a common feature of healthy interventions, okay? And that is community, relationship, connection. There's a theorist by the name of William Glasser, psychiatrist, and he was, I kind of chuckle because he's not your typical, I think he's deceased now, but he's not your typical psychiatrist, okay, therapist person, not the typical. Because if you were to go to him and say, I've got depression, I've got all these symptoms of depression, he would say, you don't have depression. Neuroses don't exist. Now, some psychoses exist, like schizotypal personality disorder, schizophrenia. These kinds of things exist, and yes, you might have to take medication for some of these psychotic disorders, but neuroses, they don't really exist. There's no such thing as depression. There's no such thing as anxiety. That's what he would say. He would say that what you're doing is you're depressing, or you are a depressing human being. It's like the action, the activity. Okay, you're engaging in depressing behavior. Okay, so it's a choice. You're choosing depression. Or he would say you are anxieting. Okay, the action. You are anxieting. Now, I don't hold to in complete agreement to Dr. Glasser in all of these things. I would agree with the fact that choice is a really important component to wellness. I think most of us would agree with that. Nobody can force us into wellness, right? So there has to be some element of choice, even if the choice is to pick up the phone and call someone, a professional, to help us. There's some choice involved. Maybe that's where it starts, and then we start to identify other small choices that we can make along the road of healing, okay? So that makes sense. But the thing that I really like about Dr. Glasser and Dr. Webolding, who added to this idea of choice theory with what he called reality therapy, is how relationships are so important to healing. So important. I did a count one time how many times you find the use of terms like one, or meaning united as one, togetherness, anything like that in Scripture. And it was overwhelming the number of times that Scripture actually refers to togetherness. There was a medical doctor that was doing a speech, and she had done some research on the opposite of togetherness, which is loneliness. And she said that as a medical doctor in her research, loneliness is just as unhealthy for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, I'm not suggesting you go smoke 14 cigarettes a day and you're good. I'm just saying that, loneliness is not good for you. Okay? It's not good for you. It's not good for me. God never intended for us to be alone, Genesis 1. okay? And so this connection, this human connection, is so important. You think of passages like Acts chapter 2. In Acts chapter 2, when the Church of Christ was established and 3,000 souls obeyed the gospel, the very first thing that it says they did after that was they worshiped. This was the first day of the week situation, and so they're worshiping God. It says they continued steadfastly in fellowship and breaking of bread and in prayers. Fellowship, koinonia, joint participation. Giving is what it seems to be a reference to. The Word, of course, breaking of bread, a synecdoche, a part standing for the whole, the Lord's Supper, and in prayer. So all the acts of worship are there, with the exception of singing. Of course, we see those elsewhere. But they're worshiping on the first day of the week. After that, what are they doing? They're taking care of one another's needs. And then at the conclusion of Acts 2, in verse 47, it says, the Lord added to the church day by day those who were being saved. And that was, in my understanding of the text, that's based on the fact that these people outside of the Christian community, they're looking into the Christian community and seeing the relationships that exist of, Christians together daily, enjoying a family relationship, and they're seeing it, and it's so inviting to them. They say, I want that. I want to have that kind of relationship. And so they obey the gospel. At least that's a part of the why, that so many people were becoming Christians day by day. Relationship. So, all that to say, by way of introduction, there are people in our assembling places like this who are struggling beyond ways in which all of us can fully appreciate and understand. I told you that sometimes that the most beneficial moments of these seminars is not what we're doing right now, but some of the most beneficial moments of the seminars are what happened before sessions, between sessions, after sessions, when I get home and we communicate about various matters. And one of the things that I hear repeatedly in those moments is, thank you, I feel like I was heard. And so, why are people saying that? That's not rhetorical. So why am I getting that kind of feedback? Thank you, not for your speech, but thank you for hearing me. And oftentimes tears are attached to that. Yeah, no preconceived attitudes or expectations. Another way maybe of saying that is no judgment, right? Hearing that without being judgmental. Yeah. Describing things that we're feeling that maybe we haven't been able to articulate. Just good to hear somebody saying it. Validation, I heard. Yeah. Anything else? Sure. So not just not feeling heard, but not feeling judged about something that is beyond their control. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. So there are two types of loneliness, right? As you were saying, there's this idea of being alone even when you're surrounded by people. There are two types of loneliness. There's objective loneliness and there's subjective loneliness. If I'm by myself, I am objectively alone. I'm by myself. During COVID, and I don't know what happened here during COVID time, and I know that we kind of don't like to talk about that anymore, but I just want to make a point. During COVID, my family and I, we had just made a move to a new work in Virginia. And while her parents were there, I knew some people there. I didn't have close connections there. I just spent 11 years in Atlanta. developing and building wonderful connections and relationships there, being in people's homes, they're in ours. We had just made the move to Virginia. I didn't have family there other than my wife and my kids. Friendships, that sort of just wasn't there. So during COVID, when we were forced to stay in our house, I was not objectively alone. I had people there. Now, when I had COVID and I had to live in the basement and everybody else was upstairs, I was objectively alone for however many days it was. But I felt alone. Even though my family was there, I felt alone. Even though I got on that computer and talked to people that way, I felt alone, right? And so we feel that way sometimes. And when we're dealing with something heavy, like a neurosis, like anxiety or depression, and it seems like nobody else understands what it's like to be us, we feel alone. And so when someone comes and talks to us about a matter that is, is kind of hidden. Nobody wants to talk about mental health. Somebody comes and talks to us about that when we have been, or know family or friends that are struggling, and doesn't seem to be telling us that we have this problem and it's our fault. It makes us feel good. Maybe for the first time in a while. You want confidence in the fact that the person that you've decided to be vulnerable with and share your struggle, that they're going to hear you. And they're not going to say the wrong thing. And the wrong thing, as we said yesterday, sometimes is not coming from a bad place, but coming from an ignorant place. And that thing is, all right, you've got depression, you need to pray harder. You need to read more scripture. And like I said yesterday, I don't think I articulated it exactly like this, but that is, I would say that's naive at best and dangerous at worst. Again, getting to the core piece, right? If we're telling somebody that they're already doing those things as a Christian, but they're dealing with depression, and now we're telling them to do it more, as if to say they're not doing it good enough. Now we've attacked their core of who they are. We've taken away their purpose. That can be dangerous. Now, in all of that we've said, that we've shared together, why would that have to stop when a professional counselor leaves? Doesn't. Everything that you've talked about showing up, listening, no preconceived ideas, without judgment. All of us can do that. Right? So, what keeps us from doing that? Exposure, okay? Exposure of ourselves. Oh. Yeah. So, so much stigma attached to it, and we're fearful. We're fearful that someone is going to share something that we have confided in them. What else? Yes. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the comment about people dealing with depression, loneliness, sadness, in particular during holiday season. I think I mentioned yesterday that my grandmother, I call her grandma. Anybody else have a grandmother and a grandma? But I had a grandma and a grandmother, and I mixed them up one time when I was a kid, and it's one of those things I'll just never forget. I'm not going to tell on either of them in particular, but they would say, I'm your fill in the blank. Got it. And so, anyway, my grandmother's been gone for a while. My grandma, we buried her 2 Saturdays before Thanksgiving. My grandpa, we buried him over 2 years ago. And so it's like when you think of those family holiday gatherings on the Ritchie side, there are more and more empty seats. Now, we fill up seats too with grands and that sort of thing, but you still have all of these empty seats. And that's hard. And that's okay, so a matter of dependence, becoming too dependent on the person that, yeah, sure. And let's come back to that in just a second. So the holiday thing, a lot of our big holiday gatherings are also coming at a time of year where the weather is changing on us. And so Thanksgiving, depending on where you live too, it impacts you differently. Thanksgiving is starting to get colder. Leaves are not still pretty on the trees, they're off the trees, and you're spending your Thanksgiving holiday getting leaves off the ground, right? And you're doing that in the cold and sometimes in the wet. And I love being outside, but I don't like being cold and wet. Christmas time, I love snow for about a day. The next day I want it gone and I want to see the sun, okay? It's harder to be outside. It's cold, it's dark. It gets dark early. All of these things. Seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, okay? And we talked some about that yesterday as well. And so when we know we're coming into that holiday season and we've experienced maybe some loss, maybe we can expect some heightened levels of sadness, then we want to be real intentional about our communication with the family and about our behaviors. And so we don't ignore, in my case, we don't ignore the fact that grandma is gone. But we celebrate the memories, the silliness, the certain types of food, all of these things. We celebrate those things. Do you remember remember that time that remember when we were growing up and grandma thought we were bored, and so she, like only grandma could do, she whittled us some arrows and fashioned a bow together, and we went out with our bow and arrows. And so it's intentionally remembering those and talking about those kinds of things with one another. It also may be the case that in moments like that we have to step aside and maybe regroup, especially if you're lean more toward introversion like I do, and being around a lot of family kind of wears on you. It doesn't mean I don't love the family, it just kind of wears on me. I might need to separate myself, re-energize so that I can re-engage the family. So all of these are considerations that maybe come up during the holidays. Now, this idea that you're talking about of, when everybody is coming to you and talking to you, that self-care piece that we mentioned earlier, I think that was today, we've got to refill our own cup, because compassion fatigue is a real thing. And I tell my students about that. Self-care is so important because you're going to find yourself listening to everybody else's problems. You've got your own problems, and you're just worn out listening to everybody else, and you want somebody to listen to you, and then you get into unethical behavior of your client becoming your counselor, and you're telling them all your stuff. And that's not good. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And so, yeah, you've got to spend some time recharging your own battery, refilling your own cup so that you can have something to give. Now, I want to get back to this idea of it's about community. It's not about having, a few counselors on staff where anybody that's struggling can just go talk to the counselors, or having some counselors in the community. Anybody struggling will just go to the counselors. I think those things are great and needed. But I also believe in this model, I'll call it a model, of kind of triaging some of those situations, because a lot of counselors will have wait lists, and we can't just jump right in to meeting with the counselor. So what if we gave some intentionality as a congregation, as people, saying, you know what? I know we got some folks that are hurting. I'm going to be someone who's willing to come alongside and just be present. I'm not going to be a Job friend, but I am going to be a friend. I'm not going to be about advising. I'm not going to be there to tell them what to do and how to handle their stuff. I'm just going to be present, and I'm going to listen. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of you can do that? How many of you can just listen? That's what's required, is just to listen, just to show up. If you'll permit me again to use myself as an example, just from some experience. I remember when we were at the hospital, St. Francis Hospital in Memphis, my mom, when she was treated for leukemia, she was at MD Anderson in Texas for months. And she had a bone marrow transplant. And the bone marrow transplant, it didn't take. And so the thing was, we had to go back to Memphis, had to get back into a state of remission, and then the idea was to go back to MD Anderson in Texas, Houston, to try the process again, another bone marrow transplant. And so Mom never made it to that point. And so I remember she had an issue where she basically went into a comatose state, and we sort of thought that was it. So we were all there. We were, being present with Dad and just us siblings. And I remember not what anybody said when they came to the hospital, but I remember the people that showed up. She came out of that, and I don't know if this was providential, but she came out of that state, and I don't know if it was so that she could share some things with us that she wanted to share with us, and then we lost her shortly after that. I remember when she died, where I was there. I was downstairs trying to get some sleep. Emily, my wife, was down there with me, and my dad came down and said, I think this is it. And so we came back up, and sure enough, it was. And that whole week that we were dealing with all of this, I don't remember what anybody said, but I can tell you about those people that showed up. And that's what we need to be for one another. I don't need for you to advise me when I'm dealing with depression or anxiety or, just intense sadness. Whatever it is. I don't need you to advise me. Probably because you don't have the clinical skills to advise me. But I do need you to just show up and listen. And I need you to show up and listen without the thought that, hey, you're going to tell everybody and your brother about what I'm experiencing. That's right. And it doesn't have to be blood to be wonderful. And that's what's so awesome about the Lord's church, is we're the blood of Christ. And that's amazing. That's right. So I was in Charleston doing a seminar back some time ago, and a lady came up to me. In fact, she asked to meet with me after the sessions on Saturday, and she wanted to write her whole story, her life story, and give that to me. And she said, "You can share it." And so I wouldn't say she wrote down her life story, but she wrote down much of it and passed it along to me and said, "You can share as much of this as you want." And I'll just share one thing. So she has a lot of stuff going on in her house, a lot of folks that are dealing with, like depression and things like that. And then also she has some schizophrenia, some psychotic types of situations, all under her roof. And her husband's not there. And these are her kids and kids that she has taken on to be her own. And then she has her own challenges. And she said, "I came to church one day," and of course everybody knows about my situation. I came to church one day, and somebody asked me how I was doing. And I said, she said, "Well, I've got this and this and this going on right now." And the response was, from this sister, "Seems like you've always got something going on." How would that make you feel? You know how she responded? She paused for a second and she said, "That's because I do always have something going on." And that was right. She always has something going on. We don't need to remind them of the heartache that's going on in their life, of the experiences that they're having. They know, they're very well aware. If they're dealing with a mental health situation, they know it. They know they're struggling. They don't need you to remind them of it. They need some sense of community. They need some sense of normalcy. It is normal, because God made it so, it is normal for two people to come together in a moment of connection where they hear one another, where they feel with one another. That's normal. Allow people that sense of normalcy, even when they're dealing with stuff that you don't understand. I'm going to go back to a theorist that I mentioned yesterday, Carl Rogers. Dr. Rogers came from he was a religious man. He came from a religious background. That's not true of all theorists. In fact, I would say many, if not most. But he did, and it really informed his process of person-centered therapy. But he said, what people need most is they need you to be real. Are you a genuine person? I mean, are you authentic? Do you genuinely care about people, and do people know that that's who you are? That's your normal. It's kind of like letting your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. And you don't have to put on a show to let Jesus' light shine. It's just naturally who you are. Well, that's what Rogers was saying in essence. I put a little twist on it to be biblically accurate. But be genuine, be real. Have a positive regard for people. He would say that. Those are his words, positive regard. When you consider other people, do you give them the benefit of the doubt? I'm not asking you to answer that. I'm just asking you to think about it. Yeah, you don't put them down at all. You just ask, how can I help you? Is there any way, anything I can do to help? Right? Yeah, positive regard is this idea of, you know what? I have the best thoughts that I can possibly have towards you. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. And I think we should always approach people that way. We give people the benefit of the doubt until they give us reason to give them any other benefit. And even then, we still love them, right? Sometimes I'll meet with young people, and one of the things that the young people will say is, well, I've had this, and this experience with my parents. And I think right now we're kind of seeing this culture of, well, you got to struggle with your parents, just divorce your parents and move on. Don't talk to them anymore. And you know what we call that? No, we call that good boundary setting. I don't want to go down this road, but I could. That is not right. It's just not healthy. But that's not to say that a part of our boundary setting might not require some relationship changes within our family. But if a young person comes to me and says, well, I had this experience, my father was too stern. Okay, well, too stern. Maybe that wasn't good. Maybe that wasn't healthy. But does that mean because your father was stern that you just set up a boundary and you never talk to him again? Because he was stern? No. So what I tried to help the client do, rather than in a case like that, now every case is different obviously, but in a case like that, I'm not going to tell a client to kick their father out of their life. I'm going to challenge their thinking a little bit. And I'm going to say, do you believe that most folks, not everybody, but most folks are trying to do good? I think most folks do. I think most folks are trying to do good. If most folks are trying to do good, if we're giving people the benefit of the doubt that most folks are trying to do good, do you think it's likely the case that if we didn't do something good, such as in this case we're too stern, but if generally speaking we're trying to do good, but in this case we're too stern, do you think that it's possible that if we know better, we'll do better? If you were to ask, yes, if you were to ask my son, who's a young adult, is there a difference in the way that I treated him and the way that I treat his sister? And I don't mean just because, he's a guy, she's a girl. There are several years difference. We lost a child in between, so there's several years difference between their ages, okay? And he will say, you don't do this, or you do this for her, but not for me. And I'll say, that's right, I messed up. Do you want me to make the same mistakes with her that I made with you? Well, no. Even though sometimes I think, well, maybe he does. But deep down, no, of course, he doesn't. And I've said, you know what? I've apologized for those mistakes because I know I've made them. And I'm trying to do better. And when we know better, we do better. Genuineness, be real. Positive regard, give other people the benefit of the doubt. Give them an opportunity. When they learn better, do better. Isn't that what God's doing with us? And then finally, be empathic. He would use that word empathy. What does empathy mean? Let me just ask you, how would you define empathy? That's about the best I know how to define it. It's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And isn't that the message of Jesus? As you consider what the other person's going through. The other person is experiencing anxiety, let's say. What did I tell you about anxiety yesterday? What is the the physiological response that we have when we're dealing with anxiety. It's like being face to face with what? A lion. And you imagine yourself having that fight, flight, freeze response, feeling like you're having a heart attack most of the day, nearly every day for 6 months. That's a glimpse into what it's like to have anxiety. And so, knowing that, you're able to then put yourself in somebody's shoes that has anxiety. Now you're walking in those shoes and you're trying to experience what it's like to be them. That's why I can't order this of my students, but I do tell them this every semester. I can't make you go do your own therapy, but I highly recommend that you go to counseling. You might not have anything in your mind that you're wanting or needing to work on right now, but I recommend that you go to try and better appreciate what it's like to be on the other side of the Freudian couch. Okay? What is it like to be them? And the more that we can behave like that as human beings, it's not about counselor type behavior, it's about Christian behavior. We're supposed to be authentic people. Real, true, honest. We're supposed to be positive toward one another, giving one another benefit of the doubt, not thinking the worst. There used to be a time when we could talk about matters pertaining to theology, and if we had an open forum situation where someone could raise a question or make a point, there used to be a time when we could do that sort of thing and not automatically hold someone suspect and condemn their soul because of a question that they ask or a comment that they make, because we gave them the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't mean they're right, but we give them an opportunity to speak and to learn and to grow. And when they learn better, do better. Same is true when we're dealing with health concerns, in this case, mental health concerns. And then just being empathic. It's like us, so if you're going to make a mistake, we will, why not be kind as we try to work through that situation? Being empathic. We are going, any one of us is a series of events away from being where that other person is, walking in somebody else's shoes. I want to take you to a passage of Scripture. I know I've just sort of hinted at a few as we've gone along here in our interaction. But this is in Mark chapter 5. Of course, you're familiar with this account of the man with the unclean spirit. And I want to read to you some words. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. And if you've been to this part of the world and you've seen the sea of Galilee, and if you look to the northwestern part of the sea, you can kind of envision that hillside, those areas in the mountain where you can envision someone coming out of that tomb-like region of the mountain. And when he had come out of the ship, he sees this man with the unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always night and day he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. Now I'm going to stop there. I'm not suggesting that an individual today that has a mental health or a mental illness, that they are being possessed by a demon. There's some people that believe that. I don't think that's right. But I'm going here to make a point. Here's somebody that was dealing with something that most people cannot comprehend. And most people cannot comprehend what it's like to be mentally ill, whether it's a neurosis or a psychosis. Most people cannot understand that. And that's okay. It's okay that you can't completely grasp that. But what's not okay is keeping those people shackled in their difficulties without being willing to show up and be present and listen and provide any kind of aid that we can possibly provide. And that's the difference. I think that in some sense, those that would shackle this individual, maybe they're shackling him for safety. Maybe in their mind it's his safety, maybe it's their safety. Maybe they had some good intentions, and maybe we don't talk to folks that are struggling out of good intentions because we say, well, we don't know what to say. We don't want to hurt them in some way. So maybe, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, maybe we have good intentions, but that doesn't help. What did Jesus do, in essence? He showed up. He showed up and he helped. Of course, he was the ultimate in helping. Sometimes the very best we can do in help is just show up and listen. See to it that we meet whatever needs are present. Food, maybe offering to say, hey, look, I understand you need to sleep. In Elijah's case, modeling for them positive behavior, bringing them along your side to give them a sense of purpose as you maybe engage in an act of service yourself and you bring them along with you. But showing up, we can all do that. All right. I'm going to, I think, stop there. And we've had a lot of good interaction. I'm going to turn it back over to you and see, of all that we've discussed over the last couple of days, maybe you have a question. Maybe it's a comment, something that you would like to share. We simply want to be mindful and respectful of others that are in the room. But maybe you have a question or a comment. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, and this is a tough one, the question is, when does showing up becoming enabling? I'm not sure that showing up to listen, to show interest, to show caring, I'm not sure that that ever is enabling. And so what I would say, because when I hear this question, my mind kind of goes to this place of, because I've been there, of we've shown up so much and nothing has changed. At least it seems that nothing has changed. I can't keep showing up. I can't keep showing up. Maybe a better way of thinking about that is, I can't show up right now. And that's okay. Remember boundaries. You may have shown up so much that you're depleted. Your energy is depleted. And that's normal. That's why self-care is so important. You might have to step away for a little while. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you don't love. It doesn't mean that you're gone forever. It just means that you've got to step away. And they may take it as abandonment. That's possible because remember, if it's somebody that's mentally ill, they're not well. And so they may take it as abandonment. Even though you may say something like, I understand that I've been showing up every Thursday to sit and to be with you and to try to provide some assistance where and when I can. I'm not going to be able to show up this Thursday. don't worry, this is not forever. I'm just not going to be able to show up this Thursday. You owe no explanation. They may feel abandoned, but you haven't abandoned them. And you're replenishing your batteries, you're filling your tank. And then when you can show back up the next Thursday or the Thursday after that, you'll show back up. I think you did a pretty good job with it just there. But I kind of tongue in cheek, but that's just the thing. A lot of times we see it and we don't say anything. That's the problem. If we actually do show up when we see it and say, hey, I noticed something's different. Could you talk to me about that? That's showing up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the honesty piece is also, critically important, and it goes back to this idea of genuineness, being real. So, anybody familiar with Jolly Bees? The restaurant Jolly Bees? I thought it was strictly a Philippines, kind of an Americanized or westernized Philippine restaurant, because I didn't see it until I went to the Philippines. And you go in and you order a hamburger and fries, which is what I wanted, but you know what the other side is? Spaghetti. And so I sat down for Sunday lunch one day at Jolly Bees, and I had hamburger, fries, and spaghetti. And then I was in New York last week, or a couple of weeks ago, and there were Jolly Bees all over the place. And I avoided it because I don't like spaghetti with my hamburger. But anyway, so I'm over there and I'm sitting here and I'm having this meal, and I'm looking across the way, and as I look across the way, there is a young lady, and I don't know how old she was, but she was pretty young, I'd say. And she had, so much makeup on, and the hair situation was just like perfect, and she's on her phone, and she's like moving this phone. I don't know if she's trying to get all the lighting just perfect. We're in Jolly Bees, but anyway, we're in Jolly Bees, and she's taking these pictures of her, and I can only think, and I know this sounds judgmental, but I can only think that we're about to post this, or we are posting this on social media. Okay? Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe not. And I'm just kind of watching this as it's happening, but isn't that what we all do to some degree? Like, if I took my phone right now, and Apple came up with this years ago, deal where you can do a panorama shot. You know what I'm talking about? And so I'm not doing it. It's black box. In fact, let me just turn it around this way. You can take pictures that way too. I forgot. But let's just imagine I'm doing a panorama like this, and then I share it to the screen. What are you going to do? What's the first thing that you're going to do when you see it up on that screen? You're going to look for yourself. Or if I text the image to all of you, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to blow up your image of you. Okay? You're trying to see, how do you look? Do you look acceptable? Right? Hopefully better than acceptable. Maybe you're like me, making sure your hair is parted correctly. But you're looking at all of this, trying to see perfection. But perfection doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Perfection in relationships, perfections in work, perfections in yourself, perfections In your faith, in the sense that you do it perfectly, perfection just doesn't exist. But we sure try to present ourselves as perfect. And that's not honest. It's not genuine. And if we're always presenting ourselves perfectly, how are our kids going to respond to that? How will our church family respond to that? Well, they don't understand what it's like to be me. They don't understand what it's like to deal with that. And if most of us are that way, where we're constantly presenting ourselves perfectly, who else is there? Who's left for us to talk to when we're dealing with difficulty? Nobody else understands what it's like to be me. Jesus wasn't that way, but he was perfect. Yes. Well, I think, yeah. Well, so when you think about some ethical considerations, so ethically, we have a responsibility to engage in beneficent behavior, do good, and non-maleficent, do no harm. And there are some decisions that we have to kind of weigh in the balance and say, okay, which makes more sense here? Might this hurt? It might hurt, but it actually might do more good. And so we kind of weigh it. Now, you know, from my perspective as a licensed therapist, I don't have a supervisor, but if I'm struggling with an ethical consideration, then I'm going to go through a whole process that includes consultation to see how might somebody else handle this situation. But getting back to the reporting piece of it, you know, a school teacher, coach, an elder, a preacher, a counselor, obviously, healthcare, physical healthcare provider, like a doctor or nurse, we're mandated reporters. We're mandated by law to report certain things. But just because an individual has a suicidal thought does not mean they're suicidal. Just because somebody confides in me during session that they have had thoughts of self-harm doesn't mean that I need to report that. Even if they've engaged in self-harm behavior does not necessarily mean that that's reportable. It's sort of about, you know, what kind of imminent threat are they to themselves and to somebody else, in particular old people and babies. That's what the law says. And so I have to keep in mind that, yeah, I've got some ethical considerations here. And I've got to work within the confines of my ethical code and the state law. For, yeah, I mean, it's mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Are there means? Yeah, are there means? You know, that's a part of it. Anytime there's a question, there's no problem in calling authorities for a well visit. I mean, it's always better to be safe than sorry in those kinds of situations. Yes. Yeah, that question is, I don't know, I've had that question so many times, and the answer is you can't help somebody that won't help themselves, right? So the follow-up to that is, what's our responsibility? What's our role in that? And it's no different than what we've already shared, and that's show up. You know, showing up may mean that I just sit by them and they just see me there. Show up may mean that they're not taking care of themselves by feeding themselves. I bring them a meal. Maybe I just put it on the front porch. You know, maybe that's a part of it. Maybe it's when they are still getting out and doing things, they're just as miserable of a human being as you can possibly imagine. I mean, everything and everybody's against them in their mind. And so, do you show up in kind? You know, we have these things in our brain called mirror neurons, and there's this whole effect of where we start to behave like the people that we are interacting with most, right? And so there's that temptation, even though it's not necessarily a conscious temptation, to behave the way that they are. But if we can intentionally change that into more positivity, model better behavior. Sometimes what we can do is we can bring them alongside of us. So for instance, if my neighbor is needing a porch built and my buddy is just down, and maybe it's beyond just being down, maybe he's got depression, but I can say, hey, look, my neighbor is really in a hard way here with this porch. He's got to have a porch built before winter, and I know you've got some tools and some know-how, and I know you're not feeling good right now. I really need your help. Bring him alongside, right? And give him a sense of purpose. When God listened to Elijah complain and complain and complain, the last thing that God did when all of that was done was he gave him a mission. He gave him something to do. And sometimes that's not forcing them to get help. That's bringing them alongside us to try to give them a sense of purpose and hope. So. All right. Well, listen, I have just... Did somebody say something? Yes, please. Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just, instead of saying, how are you doing? Don't ever ask that question unless you really want to know. You know? Just say, hey, great to see you today. And sometimes that's better. I've responded back with, do you really want to know? No, not really. So yeah, I think that's good feedback. I also want to go to this, one more time to this idea of what can we do when we see folks that are struggling. I think, again, identifying that, observing that, hey, I noticed this. Could we talk about that a little bit? And I think it's important to follow the Matthew 18 principle, even though it's talking, that's talking about sin, obviously. But sometimes what we do is we go to everybody and their brother and talk about, hey, have you noticed? Rather than just going to him, because that's the genuineness, rather than just going to them and saying, hey, look, I noticed just something different. I'm just checking in on you. And can I also make a suggestion that we don't do that in the church house? This is not where the relationship starts and stops. I filled out a form. Churches have forms. I filled out this form, and it was about what are you willing to do as a part of the church? What has it been like for you as a member of this church and building connections and relationships? And I wrote this paragraph. And the paragraph said, I do not come to the church building on Sunday to develop relationships. You may disagree with that, and that's fine. Everybody has a right to be wrong. But I'm just teasing people. Sometimes we can laugh. But I don't come here to develop relationships. I come here to worship God. Now, there is a sense in which we engage in this activity together, right? We worship God, but we build one another up. We encourage one another. But I don't come here to build relationships. Building relationships is what we do outside of this place. I mean, just think about this practically. Look at the way these pews are arranged. Now, I'm not faulting the church for this. I mean, it's like this in every church house, unless it's that shotgun style building where you just got 2 rows of pews, right? But do these pews look like they're set up for relationship building? No. Not by a long shot. I've always thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could put like the pulpit, or not even have a pulpit, and the preacher could just stand like right here, and all of the pews were around, and then we would all be, what? Singing together, facing one another, communicating with one another. That would be an auditorium that was arranged more for relationship building. All right? Now, I'm not saying that the next time I come here, I expect that all of your pews are rearranged. But if it was, that'd be really cool. This is a place for worship, but let's not start and end relationships with the Sunday thing. Let's meet together outside of Sunday. Let's get together for meals and coffee, and pecan pie is my favorite. Let's have those kinds of get-togethers and talk about real life. I like real conversation, don't you? Well, this has been fun. I've enjoyed this, and hopefully it's been helpful. Yes, sir. I'm done, but you can ask one more question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so this is going to sound easy, but it's like with most things, they sound easy, but they're not. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. Learn some, and start that with listening to yourself. How well do you really know yourself? How well do you really know your interests? How well do you really know your needs, your hurts? You know, one of the hardest questions that people get from me as far as being able to provide an answer to is that old counselor question, how does that make you feel? Or how are you feeling today? Did you know that I actually will pull out a piece of paper with, I'm always afraid I'm going to get this word wrong, emoji. My kids always made fun of me for saying that word. So, but these little emojis of different emotions, emoticons, if you will, and I would just pull out that piece of paper with all of these different emotions on it, and I would say, okay, which one are you? If I were to ask you to give me 3 or 4, like right now, if I were to ask you to give me 3 or 4 emotions that define who you are right now, just emotionally, I bet you would have a hard time with that. Maybe I shouldn't be judgmental, but most of us would have a hard time with that. So I would say, really getting to know yourself first. And if you can really know yourself and be in tune with yourself, then you can start being better in tune with other people. And I mean, we are in the church house. Pray about it. Make that a part of your daily prayer practice as well. I'm done, but if you're not done, I'm okay with that. Okay. Again, it has been great. I have thoroughly enjoyed being with you all and visiting with you and sharing with you. And I think, and you can do what you want with this, but I think just being together and talking about these things if they will just open the door of further discussion among yourselves after this weekend, man, it's been time well spent. And so I would just say, God bless you in the efforts yet to come.